and the usual noise that filled the night. My feet ached, and all I could think about was getting back to my apartment, kicking off my shoes, and relaxing. I usually took the main streets, but I was exhausted and decided to take a shortcut through an alley. It was something I'd done before without any problems. The alley was narrow and dark, with tall buildings on either side. I walked quickly, hoping to shave a few minutes off my journey. Halfway through, I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just another pedestrian. But the footsteps grew louder, and when I glanced back, I saw a group of men. They were walking together, their eyes fixed on me. My heart started to race. I tried to stay calm and picked up my pace, hoping they would pass by or turn off. But they didn't. They kept following me, their footsteps echoing off the walls. I could feel their eyes on my back, and a chill ran down my spine. I reached into my bag for my phone, thinking I could call someone or at least pretend to be on a call. My hands were shaking, and I struggled to unlock it. The men were getting closer, and I knew I had to do something fast. There was a turn up ahead that led to another alley. I took it, hoping to lose them. But when I looked back, they were still there, and they had spread out, blocking my way back. Panic set in. I felt trapped. I started running, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I spotted a fire escape ladder hanging low enough to reach. Without thinking, I jumped and grabbed it, pulling myself up. My arms burned from the effort, but I managed to climb a few rungs before looking down. The men had reached the ladder. One of them jumped up and tried to grab my foot. I kicked out, my heel connecting with his hand. He cursed and tried again. I climbed higher, my heart pounding in my ears. I reached the first landing and scrambled over the railing. I needed to find a way to keep going up or get inside the building. I tried the nearest window, but it was locked. The men were shouting now, their voices angry and threatening. I ran to the next window and, to my relief, it slid open. I climbed through, tumbling into what looked like an old storage room. I quickly closed the window and locked it, hoping it would slow them down. The room was dark and filled with dusty furniture and boxes. I could hear the men outside, banging on the fire escape and trying to force the window open. I needed to hide or find a way out. I moved quietly through the room, looking for another door. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a door at the far end. I crept towards it, praying it wasn't locked. My hand shook as I turned the knob. It opened, and I slipped through, closing it softly behind me. I found myself in a dimly lit hallway. The building seemed deserted, the air stale and musty. I had to find a way out, but I didn't know where I was going. I followed the hallway, listening for any sounds of the men. At the end of the hall, I saw a stairwell. I hurried down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. Each step felt like an eternity. I reached the ground floor and pushed open the door, stepping into another dark corridor. There was a faint light ahead, and I moved towards it. It led to an exit door. I pushed it open and found myself in another alley, this one leading back to the main street. Relief washed over me. I could still hear the men shouting in the distance, but they hadn't found me. I ran towards the street, my legs feeling like jelly. The bright lights and noise of the city were a welcome sight. I kept running until I reached a busy intersection. I stopped to catch my breath, blending into the crowd. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the fear that they might find me. But I was safe, for now. I decided to head to a nearby cafe and call a friend to come get me. I didn't want to walk home alone. As I sat in the cafe, sipping a cup of tea, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I had never felt so scared and vulnerable. I decided to go for a jog late at night. The air was cool, and the streets in my suburban neighborhood were quiet. I liked running at this time because there were no distractions, just me and the pavement. I put on my running shoes and left the house, starting at a slow pace to warm up. The first part of my route was along well-lit streets. Everything seemed normal. I picked up my pace and enjoyed the rhythmic sound of my footsteps. As I turned down a side street that had fewer streetlights, I noticed a car drive past me. Its headlights were off, which struck me as odd. I kept running, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. The car turned a corner and disappeared. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. People forget to turn on their headlights sometimes. But a few minutes later, I saw the same car again. This time, it was creeping along behind me, still with its lights off. My heart rate sped up, not just from the run but from fear. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to get a good look at the car. It was too dark to see much, but I could tell it was a sedan. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just someone being weird. I kept running, but now my mind was racing. The car continued to follow me, maintaining a slow, steady pace. I took a deep breath and decided to change my route, turning down another street that led to a busier road. Maybe the car would stop following me if I was around more people. But the car turned too, still following me. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I was getting closer to the busier road, but I didn't feel safe. I needed to find somewhere to hide and call for help. I saw a park up ahead and decided to cut through it, hoping to lose the car. I sprinted across the grass, weaving between trees and playground equipment. The park was dark, but I knew it well. I glanced back and saw the car stop at the park entrance. The driver didn't get out. They were waiting, watching. I ran to a cluster of trees and crouched down, pulling out my phone with trembling hands. I dialed 911, my breath coming in short gasps. The operator answered, and I tried to explain what was happening as quietly as I could. "There's a car following me," I whispered. "They've been stalking me during my jog. I'm in the park near Maple Street." The operator asked for more details, and I gave them as best I could. They assured me that police were on the way and told me to stay hidden. I hung up, my eyes darting around the park, trying to spot the car again. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. My heart pounded in my chest. I peeked out from behind the tree and saw a man walking towards the playground. He was tall and wearing dark clothes. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he moved with purpose, like he was searching for something. Or someone. I pressed myself against the tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. The man walked past the playground, looking around. He was getting closer to where I was hiding. I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't see me. Just then, I heard sirens in the distance. The man froze, his head snapping towards the sound. He turned and hurried back towards the car. I peeked out again and saw him get in and drive off, still with the headlights off. I waited until the police arrived before coming out of my hiding spot. I flagged them down and told them what had happened. They took my statement and assured me they would patrol the area and try to find the car. I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. The officers offered to give me a ride home, and I gladly accepted. As we drove back to my house, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to. I didn't even want to imagine. I thanked the officers and went inside, locking the door behind me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the car with its dark, menacing silhouette. I kept hearing those footsteps on the gravel path, getting closer and closer. I knew I wouldn't be going for any more late-night jogs. The neighborhood didn't feel safe anymore. In the days that followed, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that car again. The police never found the driver. It left me with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I changed my routine, started jogging in the mornings instead, and stayed in well-lit areas. I shared my experience with a few friends, and they were shocked. They told me to be careful and to always carry my phone with me. I took their advice to heart. Even now, the memory of that night is vivid. The fear, the adrenaline, the sense of being hunted. It all stays with me. I'm just grateful I made it out safe. But I'll never forget how close it was, how real the danger felt. And I'll always be on guard, just in case. I decided to go hiking alone in the national park last weekend. I love the solitude and the chance to connect with nature. I packed my backpack with some essentials and headed out early in the morning. The trail was beautiful, winding through dense forests and opening up to stunning vistas. I was about 3 hours into my hike when I veered off the main trail. I wanted to explore a bit and find a spot to have lunch. As I walked, I noticed the sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling. It was peaceful. I found a clearing and sat down to eat. The sun was high in the sky, and everything seemed perfect. After I finished my lunch, I decided to keep exploring. I hadn't seen anyone else for a while, which was strange for a weekend, but I didn't think much of it. As I walked, I heard a distant noise. It sounded like voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I kept going, curious. The voices got louder, and I realized they were coming from a group of men. I could see them through the trees, gathered around something. I hid behind a large tree and watched them. They had guns and were talking in hushed tones. My heart started pounding when I saw what they were doing. They had caught a deer in a trap and were preparing to butcher it. I realized they were poachers. I knew I had to get out of there, but as I started to back away, I stepped on a twig. The snap was loud in the silence of the forest. One of the men looked up and saw me. He shouted to the others, and they all turned in my direction. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran as fast as I could, crashing through the underbrush. I could hear them shouting behind me, their footsteps pounding on the ground. My heart was racing, and my breath came in gasps. I didn't know the area well, but I tried to follow the sun, hoping it would lead me back to the main trail. I could hear the men getting closer. I stumbled over roots and rocks, desperate to put some distance between us. I spotted a small ravine up ahead and decided to take a chance. I slid down the slope, hoping the dense vegetation would hide me. I crouched down, trying to make myself as small as possible. My chest was heaving, and I tried to quiet my breathing. The men reached the top of the ravine. They were talking loudly, frustrated that they had lost sight of me. I could hear them arguing about which direction to go. One of them suggested splitting up, and I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I waited until they moved away from the edge before I dared to move. I crawled through the underbrush, trying to be as silent as possible. Every sound seemed magnified in the quiet of the forest. I kept moving, inch by inch, trying to put as much distance between us as I could. I found a small cave and decided to hide there until it was safe to move again. I squeezed into the narrow entrance and sat in the darkness, listening for any signs of the poachers. Time seemed to stretch on forever. After what felt like hours, I heard footsteps again. They were close, and my heart leapt into my throat. I could hear the men talking, their voices low. They were frustrated, arguing about where I could have gone. One of them mentioned that they couldn't afford to leave any witnesses. I felt a surge of terror. I knew I had to stay hidden. The footsteps moved past the cave, and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. Eventually, the voices faded into the distance. I stayed in the cave for a long time, afraid to move. When I finally emerged, the sun was beginning to set. I knew I had to find my way back before it got dark. I moved cautiously, listening for any signs of the poachers. The forest was eerily quiet. I finally found the main trail and started running. My legs were shaky, and I was exhausted, but I didn't stop. I just wanted to get back to safety. I reached the trailhead just as the last light was fading. There were other hikers there, and I felt a wave of relief. I told one of them what had happened, and they called the park rangers. The rangers took my statement and promised to investigate. I was shaken, but I was safe. The rangers escorted me back to my car, and I drove home in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to being caught. The memory of those men and their angry voices haunted me. I knew I would never forget that day. From now on, I would be much more cautious when hiking alone. I had been driving for a rideshare company for about 6 months. It was mostly easy money, and I enjoyed meeting new people. It was a Friday night, and the city was alive with energy. My car was clean, my gas tank was full, and I was ready for a busy shift. I got a ping for a pickup in a quieter part of town. The passenger's name was Jason. I drove over and waited outside the address. A man in his mid-30s, wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face, approached the car. He glanced around before getting in the back seat. "Jason?" I asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Yeah, that's me," he replied, his voice flat. "Let's go." Something about him felt off, but I brushed it aside. It was late, and people were often weird at night. I started driving, following the directions on my phone. The silence in the car was heavy, and I could feel his eyes on me. "Can you take the next left instead?" he suddenly asked, breaking the silence. I hesitated, but then nodded. "Sure." I turned left, and we were now on a much darker, less populated street. My unease grew. He was fidgeting in the back seat, and I caught a glimpse of something shiny in his hand. My heart started racing. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just keep driving," he said, his tone hardening. I knew something was very wrong. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, trying to see what he was holding. It looked like a gun. My palms were sweating, and I struggled to keep my breathing calm. "Where are we headed?" I asked, hoping to keep him talking. "Out of the city," he replied. "Just keep driving." I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let him take me out of the city. I needed to think fast. My mind was racing, trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation alive. I remembered there was a gas station a few miles ahead, and I decided to head there. "I need to stop for gas," I said, trying to sound casual. "Fine, make it quick," he said, shifting in his seat. I pulled into the gas station and parked next to a pump. "I'll just be a minute," I said, getting out of the car. My legs felt weak as I walked into the station. The attendant was behind the counter, a young guy who looked bored. I approached him, trying to stay calm. "Call the police," I whispered, my voice shaking. "The guy in my car has a gun." The attendant's eyes widened, but he nodded and reached for the phone. I walked back to the car, my heart pounding. I needed to buy some time until the police arrived. "Had to grab a drink," I said, holding up a bottle of water as I got back in. Let's go, Jason snapped, his eyes darting around nervously. I started the car and pulled out of the gas station, driving slowly, hoping to see the flashing lights of a police car soon. The silence was suffocating, and I could feel his tension growing. Faster, he ordered, leaning forward. I pressed down on the gas, but my eyes kept scanning the road for any sign of help. Just then, I saw the blue and red lights flashing in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I knew I had to be careful. What the hell is that? Jason yelled, noticing the lights too. I didn't answer. The police car sped past us, heading towards the gas station. Jason cursed under his breath, and I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "We need to change cars," he said suddenly. "Pull over." My mind raced. I couldn't let him take me. As I pulled over, I spotted a construction site up ahead. I had an idea, but it was risky. "All right," I said, stopping the car. "Just don't shoot." He opened the door and got out, still holding the gun. I waited until he was halfway around the car, then I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding off and leaving him behind. I heard him yell and a shot rang out, shattering my rear window. I ducked, my hand shaking on the wheel, but I kept driving. I could see the police lights in my mirror, and I knew I had to get to them. I reached the construction site and saw a police car parked nearby. I pulled up next to it, and an officer jumped out, his gun drawn. "Help!" I yelled, scrambling out of the car. "He's got a gun." The officer took cover behind his car and called for backup. More police cars arrived within minutes, and they swarmed the area. I was shaking, my heart racing, but I knew I was safe now. They found Jason hiding in a nearby alley, his gun still in his hand. He was arrested and taken away. The police told me he was a fugitive, wanted for several crimes. I couldn't believe I had picked him up. It took a while for my nerves to settle, but I was just glad to be alive. The police praised me for keeping my cool, but I knew it was mostly luck. I quit driving for the rideshare company after that. I couldn't risk another night like that. Looking back, it felt like a nightmare, but it was real. And it reminded me how quickly things can go wrong. I had been looking forward to this fishing trip for months. The remote lake was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, a place to clear my head and enjoy some quiet time. I had packed my gear, some food, and enough supplies for a couple of days. The drive was long, and the road turned from pavement to gravel, and then to a narrow dirt path. The lake was isolated, surrounded by dense woods. It was perfect. I set up my tent near the water's edge, unloaded my gear, and prepared my fishing rod. The lake was calm, and the sound of the water lapping against the shore was soothing. I spent the first few hours just casting my line, enjoying the solitude. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was everything I had hoped for. As it got dark, I made a small fire and cooked some dinner. I was feeling relaxed, thinking about the next day and the fish I might catch. The night was quiet, the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional splash from the lake. I decided to turn in early, wanting to be up at dawn to start fishing again. I woke up just as the sun was rising. The lake was shrouded in a light mist, and everything was still. I grabbed my rod and headed to the water. After a couple of hours of fishing, I heard the sound of a motorboat approaching. I looked up and saw a small boat with 3 men in it. They were coming towards my camp. I waved, trying to be friendly, but they didn't wave back. As they got closer, I could see they didn't look too happy. They pulled up to the shore and got out. The leader, a tall man with a scruffy beard, walked up to me. "You're on private land," he said, his voice gruff. "This is our territory." I was taken aback. I didn't know. I thought this was public land. "I'll pack up and leave." The man shook his head. "It's too late for that. We don't like strangers around here." The other two men, equally rough-looking, flanked him. I felt a knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'll leave right now." The leader took a step closer, his eyes cold. "We don't take kindly to trespassers. You think you can just come here and do whatever you want?" One of the other men grabbed my fishing rod and snapped it in half. "Hey!" I shouted, but he just laughed. The situation was escalating quickly, and I knew I had to stay calm. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to defuse the tension. "I'll leave. Just let me pack up my stuff." The leader nodded slowly. "You better be gone by the time we come back. And don't leave anything behind." They got back in their boat and left. I started packing up as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I could hear the boat circling the lake. I had a bad feeling they wouldn't just leave me alone. I was almost unpacking when I heard the boat approaching again. I looked up and saw the three men coming back, this time with a couple of hunting rifles. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my bag and started walking towards my car. "Leaving so soon?" the leader called out, a mocking tone in his voice. They were blocking the path to my car. "I'm going," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble." One of the men raised his rifle and aimed it at me. "You ain't going anywhere until we say so." Panic surged through me. "Please, I just want to leave." The leader smirked. "Start walking. Into the woods. Now." I had no choice. I turned and started walking into the dense forest, my mind racing. I could hear them following me, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. I had to find a way out of this. We walked for what felt like hours. The woods were thick, and it was hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Suddenly, they stopped. "Get on your knees," the leader ordered. I hesitated, and one of the men shoved me hard, forcing me down. My knees hit the ground painfully. "You think you can come here and fish in our lake?" the leader said, his voice filled with anger. "You think you can just leave without paying for it?" I was trembling, my mind searching for a way out. "Please, just let me go." "I won't tell anyone." The leader laughed. "Oh, you're not going to tell anyone anything." At that moment, I saw a glimmer of hope. There was a dense thicket to my right. If I could just get up and run. Without thinking, I bolted to my feet and dashed into the thicket. Branches scratched at my face and arms, but I didn't stop. I could hear them shouting behind me, the sound of gunshots echoing through the trees. I kept running, adrenaline fueling my escape. I stumbled upon a narrow trail and followed it, hoping it would lead me to safety. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, but I didn't dare slow down. Finally, I burst out of the woods and onto a dirt road. I looked around, desperate for any sign of help. In the distance, I saw a small cabin with smoke coming from the chimney. I ran towards it, my lungs burning. I pounded on the door, praying someone was home. An elderly man opened it, his eyes widening in surprise. "Please help me," I gasped. "There are men with guns chasing me." He quickly ushered me inside and locked the door. "Sit down, son," he said, grabbing a shotgun from the wall. "I'll take care of this." I collapsed onto a chair, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. The man stepped outside, and I heard him shouting at the men. There was a tense silence, followed by the sound of the boat engine starting up and moving away. The old man came back inside, his face stern. "You're safe now," he said. "They won't bother you again." I nodded, too shaken to speak. He offered me a glass of water and let me rest. After a while, I thanked him and headed back to my car, still parked by the lake. I packed up the rest of my things and drove away, vowing never to return to that place again. The fear from that day stayed with me for a long time. I never expected a simple fishing trip to turn into a fight for my life. I was excited to babysit at the mansion. It was the biggest house I had ever seen, with long hallways, rooms I could get lost in, and expensive furniture everywhere. The pay was great, and the kids, Emily and Jake, were sweet. The parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, seemed nice enough too. They gave me a quick tour, explained the house rules, and left for their event. The night started off easy. The kids played in the huge living room while I made them dinner. We watched a movie, and I got them to bed without any trouble. By 9 p.m., I was alone in the large, quiet house. I settled on the couch with a book and a cup of tea, enjoying the peacefulness. Around 10 p.m., I heard a noise. It sounded like a door closing softly. I put my book down and listened. The house was quiet again. I shook it off, thinking it was just the old house settling. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I got up and checked on the kids. They were fast asleep. I decided to look around. As I walked through the house, I noticed a light on in Mr. Thompson's office. I was sure it had been off earlier. My heart started to race. I pushed the door open slowly and saw that the room was empty, but the light was definitely on. I turned it off and backed out of the room, feeling uneasy. I went back to the living room, but I couldn't relax. I kept hearing faint noises, like footsteps, but every time I checked, there was nothing there. Then, I heard a door creak open, and this time it wasn't subtle. It was coming from the basement. I took a deep breath and decided to investigate. I found the basement door slightly ajar. The basement was dark, and the light switch didn't seem to work. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen and headed down the stairs. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing shelves of storage boxes and old furniture. I scanned the room and saw nothing unusual until I reached the back corner. There, I found a door slightly open. I pushed it wider with a trembling hand. Inside the small room, I found a desk covered in papers and files. There was a safe, its door slightly open. I glanced through the papers and realized they were financial documents, names, and numbers that didn't make much sense to me. But one word stood out: laundering. My stomach dropped. The Thompsons were involved in something illegal. I heard a noise upstairs and quickly turned off the flashlight. Footsteps echoed through the house. I stayed still, listening. It sounded like multiple people moving around. Panic set in. I had to get back to the kids. I slowly made my way up the stairs, every creak of the wood making me wince. When I reached the top, I saw shadows moving in the hallway. I ducked back, heart pounding. I needed to get to the kids without being seen. I crept along the walls, staying in the shadows, and made it to the kids' room. I woke them quietly, telling them we needed to hide. Emily and Jake were scared but did as I said. We hid in their closet, surrounded by toys and clothes. I heard voices outside the door, men talking in hushed tones. They were looking for something. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't check the closet. The door creaked open, and I heard footsteps entering the room. I could see their shadows through the crack in the closet door. "Check the office again," one of the men said. "They must have hidden it somewhere." They left the room, and I let out a silent sigh of relief. We needed to get out of the house. I led the kids out of the closet and towards the back door. The house was a maze, and it was hard to avoid the men. We made it to the kitchen, and I grabbed the phone to call the police, but the line was dead. They must have cut it. I led the kids to the back door, but just as I opened it, one of the men spotted us. "Hey!" he shouted. We ran into the yard, my heart racing. I heard him chasing us, his footsteps getting closer. We made it to the edge of the property, where there was a small gate leading to the neighbor's yard. We squeezed through the gate and ran to the neighbor's house. I pounded on the door, praying someone would answer. Lights came on inside, and an elderly woman opened the door. "Please, help us," I gasped. "Call the police." She quickly ushered us in and locked the door. She called the police while I tried to calm the kids down. We could hear the men outside, but they didn't try to follow us into the neighbor's house. The police arrived quickly and arrested the men. They searched the Thompsons' house and found more evidence of their crimes. It turned out the Thompsons had been laundering money for a criminal organization. The men who broke in were their associates, looking for documents that could incriminate them. The police assured me that the kids and I were safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling of fear that had gripped me that night. The Thompsons were arrested, and the kids went to stay with relatives. I was hailed as a hero for protecting them, but all I could think about was how close we had come to something terrible happening. That night changed me. I never took safety for granted again, and I never babysat in a big, empty house after dark ever again. I decided to take a solo camping trip in the national forest. I needed a break from everything, and the idea of being out in nature, away from people, sounded perfect. I packed my gear, drove out to a remote spot, and hiked a few miles into the forest to set up camp. It was peaceful. The only sounds were birds and the rustling of leaves. I set up my tent by a small stream and started a fire. As the sun set, I cooked dinner and enjoyed the quiet. The stars came out, and I felt at ease. I went to bed early, tired from the hike. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. My heart raced. I stayed still, listening. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, circling my campsite. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. Shining the light outside, I saw nothing. I listened for a moment longer, then convinced myself it was just an animal. I zipped the tent back up and lay down, trying to calm my nerves. Sleep didn't come easily, but eventually, I drifted off. In the morning, I found footprints around my campsite. They were definitely human. My stomach churned. Someone had been here, watching me. I decided to stay another night, but to be more cautious. I spent the day hiking and exploring, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. That evening, as I was sitting by the fire, I heard voices in the distance. They were getting closer. I put out the fire quickly and hid behind a tree, watching. Two men emerged from the darkness, armed with rifles. They looked rough, like they had been out here a long time. They started poking around my campsite, talking to each other in low voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they didn't seem happy. One of them kicked my tent and shouted, "We know you're out here. Come out now, and we won't hurt you." I stayed hidden, my heart pounding. They were looking for me. The other man started searching the bushes, getting closer to my hiding spot. I knew I had to move, but every step I took made a noise. Suddenly, the man shone his flashlight in my direction. "There he is," he yelled. I bolted, running through the trees as fast as I could. The men shouted and started after me. I could hear their footsteps and the snap of branches as they closed in. I tripped over a root and fell hard, scraping my hands and knees. I scrambled up and kept running, adrenaline pumping. I found a thick cluster of bushes and dived into them, trying to catch my breath. I heard the men pass by, cursing and calling out to each other. I stayed still, afraid to move. After what felt like hours, their voices faded. I knew I couldn't go back to my campsite. I had to get out of the forest. I waited until dawn, then started making my way back to the trailhead, keeping off the main paths. Every sound made me jump. I felt like they were still out there, watching. I was exhausted and hungry, but I couldn't stop. I needed to get to safety. Around midday, I finally reached the trailhead. My car was still there, a welcome sight. I got in and locked the doors, my hands shaking. I drove straight to the nearest town and found a police station. I told them what had happened. They took my report seriously and sent officers to search the area. I never found out who those men were or why they were so aggressive. The police said they might have been illegal hunters or survivalists who thought I was a threat. I was just glad to be safe. I moved to a quiet coastal town to get away from the chaos of the city. It was peaceful, with beautiful beaches and friendly locals. I found a small house to rent and settled into a routine of morning walks along the shore and evening visits to the local cafe. It was the perfect place to clear my mind and find some peace. One evening, I decided to take a walk along the pier. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the water. As I walked, I noticed a small boat docking and a group of men unloading something. At first, I didn't think much of it, but something about the way they were moving caught my attention. They were looking around nervously, and their movements were quick and deliberate. Curiosity got the better of me, so I found a spot where I could watch without being seen. As the men unloaded the boat, I saw they were moving people. They were blindfolded and had their hands tied. My heart started pounding. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like they were trafficking people. I pulled out my phone to take some pictures, but I was too far away to get a clear shot. I knew I had to get closer, but I didn't want to get caught. I waited until the men had moved the people into a nearby warehouse and then followed, staying hidden in the shadows. When I got closer, I could hear the men talking. They were discussing shipments and payments. I felt sick to my stomach. This was bigger than I had imagined. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. I decided to take a few pictures of the warehouse and then go to the police. As I was about to leave, I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could react, someone grabbed me from behind and covered my mouth. I struggled, but the person was too strong. They dragged me into the warehouse and threw me to the ground. The men I had been watching surrounded me, their faces angry and menacing. "What do we have here?" one of them sneered. "A little spy?" I tried to explain that I wasn't a threat, but they didn't believe me. They searched me and found my phone. When they saw the pictures, they knew I had seen too much. They tied my hands and blindfolded me, just like the people they had brought in. I was thrown into a small, dark room. The air was damp and smelled of mold. I could hear the muffled sounds of people crying and pleading. My heart was racing, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I had no idea what they were going to do to me. Hours passed, though it felt like days. I was hungry and thirsty, and my wrists were sore from the ropes. Every sound made me jump, fearing they were coming for me. I thought about my family and friends, wondering if I would ever see them again. Finally, the door creaked open. 2 men came in and dragged me out of the room. They took me to a larger room where the leader was waiting. He looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "You've seen too much," he said. "We can't let you go." I pleaded with them, saying I wouldn't tell anyone, but they didn't believe me. They discussed what to do with me, and I could hear the fear in my own voice as I begged for my life. I knew I had to escape, but I didn't know how. They left me alone in the room, tied to a chair. I struggled against the ropes, trying to free my hands. It seemed hopeless, but I couldn't give up. I had to find a way out. I managed to loosen the ropes just enough to slip one hand free. With my heart pounding, I untied the rest of the ropes and stood up, my legs trembling. I crept to the door and peeked out. The hallway was empty. I slipped out of the room and moved quietly down the hall, looking for an exit. I could hear voices nearby, so I ducked into a small office. I found a phone on the desk and quickly dialed 911. I whispered my location and what was happening, then hung up before anyone could find me. I knew I had to hide until help arrived. I found a closet and squeezed inside, closing the door behind me. I could hear the men searching for me, their voices angry and frustrated. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. Minutes felt like hours as I waited in the darkness. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance. The men panicked and started running. I stayed hidden until I heard the police shouting commands. I burst out of the closet, shouting for help. The police found me and took me to safety. They raided the warehouse and arrested the men. The people they had captured were freed, and I was taken to the hospital to be checked out. I was shaken but relieved to be alive. It took me a long time to recover from that night. The images and sounds haunt me even to this day. I was on a cross-country road trip, driving from New York to California. It was a long drive, but I loved the open road and the feeling of freedom. On the 3rd day, somewhere in the Midwest, I decided to stop at a small diner for lunch. It was an old place, the kind you see in movies, with neon signs and red vinyl booths. I walked in and took a seat at the counter. There were only a few other customers, and the waitress, an older woman with a kind smile, brought me a menu. I ordered a burger and a coffee, hoping to get back on the road quickly. As I waited, I noticed 2 men sitting in a corner booth, talking quietly. They looked rough, like they had seen some hard times. At first, I didn't pay much attention to them. I was more focused on my food and checking the map for my next stop. But then I heard a few words that caught my attention. One of the men said something about taking care of him tonight and making sure there are no witnesses. My heart started to race. I tried to act natural, but my hands were shaking. I kept my head down, but I listened closely. The more I heard, the more it became clear they were planning to kill someone. They mentioned a name and a location, talking about how they would make it look like an accident. I felt sick to my stomach. I had to tell someone, but I didn't want to get caught. Just then, the waitress brought my food. I tried to eat, but I could barely swallow. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I decided I would finish my meal and then call the police once I was back in my car. But as I was about to leave, one of the men got up and walked towards the restroom, passing right by me. He glanced at me, and for a moment, I thought he knew I had been listening. I paid my bill and walked out to my car, trying to stay calm. I got in and locked the doors, my hands still shaking. I started the car and pulled out my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, I saw the other man standing by the diner's entrance, watching me. My heart skipped a beat. I had to get out of there. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove down the road, my eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. Sure enough, a few minutes later, I saw their car behind me. They were following me. Panic set in, and I knew I had to lose them. I took a series of random turns, trying to shake them off. But they stayed right behind me, matching my every move. I was driving down a deserted country road, no other cars in sight. I needed to find a way to escape. I saw a sign for a rest stop up ahead and decided to take a chance. I pulled in and drove around to the back, hoping they wouldn't see me. I parked behind a large truck and turned off the engine. I held my breath, listening for their car. I heard it drive past, but then it stopped. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I peeked out and saw their car slowly driving through the rest stop, looking for me. I ducked down and waited. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, their car drove away. I waited a little longer to make sure they were gone before starting my car again. I needed to find a safe place to call the police. I drove back to the main road and headed for the next town. It was a small place with only a few buildings. I found a gas station and pulled in, going straight to the payphone. My hands were still shaking as I dialed 911. I told the operator everything I had heard and where I was. They said they would send someone right away and told me to stay put. I hung up and waited, my eyes scanning the road for any sign of the men. About 15 minutes later, a police car pulled in. I ran over and told the officer what had happened. He took my statement and promised they would look into it. I felt a little safer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still in danger. The officer escorted me to the local police station, where I gave a more detailed statement. They assured me they would investigate and told me to be careful. I thanked them and got back on the road, but the fear stayed with me. For the rest of my trip, I kept looking over my shoulder, worried they might find me again. Every car that pulled up behind me made my heart race. It was a relief when I finally reached California, but I knew I would never forget that terrifying experience. I later heard from the police that they had arrested the two men. They had been planning to kill a local businessman over a debt. Knowing they were off the streets helped me sleep a little better, but the memory of that day is still in my head all the time. I was house sitting for my aunt in a quiet rural area. She had a cozy little place surrounded by fields and woods. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway for me while she visited her sister. The first couple of days were just that. Peaceful. The third day, I noticed something odd about the house next door. It was an old farmhouse, run down and usually empty. I knew my aunt said no one lived there, but that afternoon, I saw a car parked out front. I thought maybe someone had bought the place and was checking it out. Later that evening, I saw lights on in the house. They were bright, too bright for a house like that. They stayed on all night, and I found it strange. I tried not to think too much about it, but I couldn't help feeling uneasy. The next morning, I saw more cars arriving. Men got out and went into the house, carrying large bags and boxes. They looked rough, not the type you'd expect to see moving into a quiet country home. I started to get a bad feeling. As the day went on, I kept an eye on the house. I saw smoke coming from one of the windows. It didn't look like normal smoke from a chimney, more like something was burning inside. I tried to brush it off, but my curiosity got the best of me. That evening, I decided to take a closer look. I walked my dog along the edge of the property, trying to get a better view without being obvious. The men were moving around inside, and I could hear the hum of machinery. I realized they weren't moving in, they were setting something up. I went back to my aunt's house and locked all the doors and windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that something illegal was going on next door. I decided to call my aunt and tell her what I had seen. She agreed it sounded suspicious and told me to stay inside and be careful. The next day, I tried to go about my routine, but I was too on edge. I saw more cars coming and going, and the men were always carrying things in and out. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. That night, I heard loud noises coming from the house. It sounded like a fight. I peeked out the window and saw the men arguing in the yard. One of them had a gun. I froze, realizing how dangerous the situation was. I decided to call the police. I explained everything I had seen and heard. They told me to stay inside and keep my doors locked. They said they'd send someone to check it out. I waited anxiously, watching the house next door. The men were still outside, shouting at each other. I saw one of them glance in my direction, and my heart skipped a beat. I quickly moved away from the window. A few minutes later, I heard a car pull up to my aunt's house. I looked out and saw a police cruiser. Relief washed over me. I went to the door to let the officer in. As I opened the door, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw one of the men from next door standing there. He looked angry. "What did you see?" he demanded, stepping closer. I backed away, trying to stay calm. "I didn't see anything," I lied, but he didn't believe me. The police officer came up the steps and saw what was happening. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his hand on his holster. The man glared at me, then turned and walked away. The officer escorted me back inside and took my statement. He told me they had been investigating the house next door for some time, suspecting it was being used as a drug lab. They thanked me for calling and said they'd take it from there. The police raided the house that night. They arrested the men and confiscated everything inside. It turned out the place was being used to manufacture drugs, just like I had suspected. I stayed at my aunt's house until she returned, but I never felt completely safe again. I kept the doors locked and didn't go outside unless I had to. I was relieved when my aunt finally came home and I could leave. The experience left me shaken. I learned how quickly a peaceful place could become dangerous. I was grateful for the police and that nothing worse had happened. I took a job as a security guard at a gated community. It seemed like an easy gig. The neighborhood was quiet, full of well-off families. My job was to patrol the area, check IDs, and make sure nothing went wrong. I didn't expect much excitement, but that changed quickly. One evening, I was doing my rounds when I noticed a man I'd never seen before. He was standing outside one of the houses, just staring at it. He wore a hoodie, and I couldn't see his face clearly. Something about him felt off. I approached him, asking if he needed help. He turned quickly, his face hidden in the shadows. "Just visiting a friend," he muttered and walked away. I watched him go, but he never entered a house. Instead, he disappeared around a corner. I went back to the security office and checked the visitor logs. There was no record of anyone visiting that address. It bothered me, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe he was lost, I thought. A few days later, I saw him again, this time near the playground. He was watching the kids play. I approached him again, but he walked away before I could say anything. I reported it to my supervisor, who told me to keep an eye out but not to worry too much. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man. Who was he? Why was he hanging around the neighborhood without a reason? I decided to dig a little deeper. The next day, I checked the security cameras. I found footage of him walking around late at night, looking into windows. He always wore that same hoodie, keeping his face hidden. My gut told me something was very wrong. I started watching the house he seemed most interested in. It belonged to a man named Mr. Collins, who lived alone. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself. I didn't know much about him, but I decided to do some checking. I ran a background check on Mr. Collins. What I found made my blood run cold. His real name was Michael Tate, and he was a wanted criminal. He had been on the run for years, suspected of several violent crimes. I couldn't believe it. How had he managed to live here unnoticed? I reported my findings to my supervisor, who contacted the police. They told us to be cautious and not to alert Tate. They would handle it. I felt a mix of fear and relief. At least something was being done. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided to take one last look at the cameras before going home. What I saw terrified me. The man in the hoodie was back, but this time he wasn't alone. He had a gun. I called the police immediately, telling them what I saw. They told me to stay put and wait for them. I watched the screen, my heart pounding, as the man and Tate talked. I couldn't hear them, but their body language was tense. Minutes felt like hours. I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. The man in the hoodie must have heard them too because he turned and ran. Tate stood there for a moment before heading back inside. The police arrived and surrounded the house. They moved in quickly, arresting Tate without much trouble. They never caught the man in the hoodie. He had vanished into the night. The aftermath was a blur. The police questioned me for hours, going over every detail. They told me Tate had been living under a false identity for years, right under everyone's noses. The man in the hoodie was likely an accomplice or someone with a grudge. I couldn't go back to work for a while. The fear and anxiety were too much. When I did return, the neighborhood felt different. The residents were on edge, always looking over their shoulders. I kept doing my job, but I was always alert, always watching. Months passed, and things slowly returned to normal. But I never forgot that night. It changed me. I realized how quickly safety could be shattered, how evil could hide in plain sight. I became more cautious, more aware of the world around me. I still work as a security guard, but I'm always on the lookout. I know the dangers that can lurk behind friendly faces and quiet streets. I went to a big music festival last summer with my friends. We were all excited, the atmosphere was electric, and the music was amazing. Everything seemed perfect at first. We danced, laughed, and enjoyed the shows. It was crowded, but that just added to the excitement. After a while, I needed to use the restroom. I told my friends I'd be right back and made my way through the crowd. The lines were long, and it took longer than I expected. By the time I was done, I realized I couldn't see my friends anywhere. I tried calling them, but the reception was terrible with so many people around. I started to get a bit worried. I walked around, trying to find a familiar face or a landmark we had seen earlier. It was getting dark, and the crowd seemed to grow thicker. I felt lost and a bit scared. That's when a man approached me. He looked friendly enough, wearing a festival wristband and holding a map. "Are you lost?" he asked. I nodded, explaining that I had been separated from my friends. He smiled and said he could help. I've been coming to this festival for years. I know it like the back of my hand, he said. I felt a bit of relief. Maybe he could help me find my way back to the main stage where we had agreed to meet if we got separated. We started walking together, and he pointed out different spots he said were important. As we walked, I noticed he was steering me away from the crowd. I mentioned it, and he said he knew a shortcut. Something didn't feel right, but I was so anxious to find my friends that I ignored my gut feeling. We ended up in a less crowded area, near the edge of the festival grounds. It was darker, and the noise from the stages seemed distant. My heart started to race. I asked him where we were going, and his friendly demeanor changed. He grabbed my wrist tightly and said, "You're not going anywhere until I say so." Panic set in. I tried to pull away, but his grip was strong. He dragged me towards a secluded spot, away from the lights and people. I screamed for help, but the music drowned out my voice. He pushed me against a fence, and I could see the malicious intent in his eyes. I was terrified. Desperation gave me strength. I kicked and struggled, managing to land a hard kick to his shin. He loosened his grip for a second, and I took my chance. I twisted free and ran as fast as I could back towards the crowd. I didn't look back. My heart was pounding, and I was shaking with fear. I ran into a group of people and screamed for help. They could see I was in distress and immediately surrounded me. I told them what happened, and they quickly flagged down a security guard. The guard took me to a safe area and called the police. They asked me for a description of the man and assured me they would find him. I finally managed to get a hold of my friends. They were frantic, having been looking for me everywhere. We reunited, and I broke down, telling them what happened. They were shocked and angry, and we all stayed together for the rest of the night. The police never found the man. They said he likely blended back into the crowd and slipped away. The festival organizers increased security for the rest of the event, but the experience left me shaken. It took me a while to feel safe again. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I came to something terrible. I learned to trust my instincts and be more cautious, especially in large crowds. It was a horrifying experience, but I was grateful to have escaped unharmed. I still go to festivals, but I'm always more aware of my surroundings. I stay close to my friends and make sure we have a plan in case we get separated. I decided to go mountain biking alone one weekend. I needed the break from work and figured the solitude would do me good. I chose a remote trail I'd read about online, known for its challenging terrain and stunning views. I packed my gear, loaded my bike onto my car, and set off early in the morning. The drive was long and winding, but I finally reached the trailhead. There were no other cars in the parking area, which didn't bother me at first. I unloaded my bike, put on my helmet, and started pedaling up the narrow, rocky path. The trail was tougher than I expected, but I enjoyed the challenge. The fresh air and the sound of birds were calming. I rode for about an hour, stopping occasionally to take in the scenery. It was beautiful and peaceful, everything I hoped for. About midday, I decided to take a break. I found a small clearing off the trail, sat down, and drank some water. As I sat there, I noticed something odd. There was a faint sound, like people talking, coming from deeper in the woods. It struck me as strange since I hadn't seen anyone else all day. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to quietly check it out. I left my bike and moved cautiously toward the voices. As I got closer, I saw a group of 4 men in a small clearing. They were digging a hole and seemed tense. They didn't see me, so I hid behind a tree and watched. One of the men pulled something out of a large bag. It looked like a bundle wrapped in a tarp. My heart started racing when I realized it was the shape of a human body. I covered my mouth to stop myself from making any noise. They were burying a body. Panic set in. I had to get out of there before they noticed me. I started to back away slowly, but I stepped on a twig. It snapped loudly. The men froze and looked in my direction. I didn't wait to see their reactions. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to my bike. I heard them shouting behind me, and I knew they were coming after me. My legs felt like lead, but adrenaline kept me going. I reached my bike, jumped on, and started pedaling furiously down the trail. My heart was pounding, and my breath came in gasps. The trail was rough, and I had to concentrate to avoid crashing. I glanced back and saw the men running after me. They were shouting, telling me to stop. I pushed harder, knowing I couldn't let them catch me. I rode faster than I ever had before, my focus on the path ahead and getting away. The trail twisted and turned, and I barely managed to stay on it. My mind raced with fear and the need to survive. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a fork in the trail. I took the path that led back toward the parking area. I hoped it would throw them off. I didn't dare slow down to look back. I could still hear their shouts, but they were getting fainter. I finally reached the parking area, my legs burning and my lungs on fire. I threw my bike onto the car rack and jumped into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly that it took a moment to get the key in the ignition. I started the car and sped away, gravel flying behind me. As I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see them behind me. But the road remained empty. My heart gradually slowed, and I forced myself to focus on the drive. I needed to get to a safe place and call the police. I reached a small town about 20 miles away. I pulled into a gas station and called 911. I told the dispatcher everything, from the voices I heard to the men chasing me. They told me to stay put and wait for the police. The police arrived quickly. I repeated my story to them, and they took it seriously. They sent officers to the trailhead and the clearing where I saw the men. They also told me to stay in town until they had more information. Later that evening, the police informed me they found the clearing and the half-buried body. They hadn't caught the men yet, but assured me they were on it. They took my statement again and advised me to stay somewhere safe for the night. I checked into a motel, still shaken by the day's events. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound made me jump, and my mind kept replaying the moment those men saw me. I kept thinking about what could have happened if they caught me. The police contacted me the next day. They hadn't found the men yet, but they assured me they were looking. They told me to be careful and report anything suspicious. I drove home, grateful to be alive, but haunted by what I'd seen. I don't think I'll ever go mountain biking alone again. I decided to take a break from the city and booked a weekend at a remote bed and breakfast. I needed the peace and quiet. The place was charming in the photos, a big old house surrounded by trees, far from any town. I thought it would be perfect for some rest and relaxation. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the gravel driveway. The house looked just like the pictures, but something about it felt off. I shrugged it off as nerves from the long drive. I grabbed my bag and walked up to the front door. The owners, a middle-aged couple named Jane and Tom, greeted me warmly. They seemed nice enough, but there was something in their eyes that made me uneasy. Jane led me to my room, a cozy space with a big bed and a window overlooking the forest. She told me dinner would be ready in an hour. I unpacked and freshened up. As I walked down the creaky stairs, I noticed the house was very quiet. I was the only guest, which seemed odd for a weekend. At dinner, Jane and Tom sat with me, asking a lot of questions about my life. Their interest felt intrusive, but I answered politely. After dinner, I wanted to explore the house a bit. I wandered through the dimly lit hallways, looking at old photographs and knickknacks. The air felt heavy, and the silence was almost suffocating. I found a small library and decided to read for a while. As I settled into a chair, I heard whispering. It sounded like Jane and Tom, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I put the book down and followed the voices. They were coming from the kitchen. I moved closer and peeked through the crack in the door. Jane and Tom were arguing in hushed tones. I couldn't hear much, but I caught phrases like "she doesn't know" and "we need to be careful." My stomach tightened. I backed away quietly and went back to my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the old house made me jump. I kept thinking about the argument I overheard. What didn't I know? What did they need to be careful about? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my door. They stopped, and I held my breath, listening intently. After a moment, the footsteps continued down the hall. I got up and locked the door, my heart pounding. I didn't feel safe here anymore. The next morning, Jane and Tom acted like nothing was wrong. They served breakfast with smiles and asked if I slept well. I lied and said I did. I needed to get out of there, but my car was parked far from the house, and I didn't want to raise their suspicion. After breakfast, I said I wanted to take a walk in the woods. Tom offered to join me, but I insisted on going alone. I grabbed my bag and slipped out the back door, heading for the trees. As soon as I was out of sight, I ran towards my car. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see them following me. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I finally got the door open and jumped in, locking it behind me. I started the engine and sped down the driveway, not looking back. As I drove away, I saw Jane and Tom standing on the porch, watching me with those cold eyes. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. I parked at a gas station and called the police. I told them everything, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They said they'd look into it, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. The whole experience left me shaken. I never found out what Jane and Tom were hiding, and I didn't want to. I was just grateful to be out of there. I never went back to that bed and breakfast, and I never will. Now, whenever I think about taking a trip to get away from it all, I remember that weekend. The quiet house, the strange owners, and the feeling of being watched. I was traveling alone in Eastern Europe, trying to see as much of the region as I could. I had just arrived in a small town that was off the usual tourist track, hoping to experience something different. The town was quaint, with narrow streets and old buildings, and I was excited to explore. I found a small hotel and checked in. The receptionist was friendly, but I noticed a man sitting in the lobby who kept glancing at me. He looked rough, with tattoos on his arms and a scar across his face. I felt uneasy but told myself it was nothing. After settling in, I decided to walk around and find a place to eat. The streets were quiet, and the few people I saw didn't seem very welcoming. I found a small cafe and ordered some food. As I sat there, I noticed the same man from the hotel standing across the street, watching me. My unease grew, but I tried to ignore it. I finished my meal and headed back to the hotel, feeling paranoid. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder, but the man was gone. I reached the hotel and quickly went to my room, locking the door behind me. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise outside my door. Before I could react, the door burst open and two men stormed in. One of them was the man from the lobby. They grabbed me and dragged me out of the room. I struggled and shouted, but no one came to help. They took me to a dark, abandoned building on the outskirts of town. They tied me to a chair and started asking questions in a language I didn't understand. I tried to explain that I was just a tourist, but they didn't believe me. They kept calling me a spy and demanding information I didn't have. Hours passed, and the men grew more frustrated. They were rough, hitting me when they didn't like my answers. I was terrified and in pain, unsure if I would make it out alive. I tried to think of a way to escape, but the ropes were tight, and there was no way out. One of the men left the room, leaving me with the man from the hotel. He seemed slightly less aggressive, so I tried to reason with him. I told him I was just a traveler, showed him my passport and travel documents. He looked at them and seemed to hesitate, but then his partner returned, and the questioning continued. They left me alone for a while, giving me a chance to think. I remembered I had my phone in my pocket, but my hands were tied. I managed to wiggle my fingers and get the phone out, hoping to send a message for help. I fumbled with it, trying to be quiet, and finally sent a text to a friend back home, telling them I was in danger and giving my location. Hours passed, and the men returned. They were angry, saying they didn't believe my story. They seemed to be losing patience. I was scared they would decide to kill me. Then, there was a commotion outside the room. Voices shouted, and I heard footsteps running. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a group of police officers stormed in. They tackled the men and freed me from the chair. I was in shock, barely able to comprehend what was happening. The officers took me to a safe place and started asking me questions. They had been tipped off by my friend and managed to track my location. It turned out the men were part of a local gang involved in various criminal activities. They had mistaken me for a spy because of my foreign appearance and suspicious behavior. The police assured me I was safe now and took me back to the hotel to collect my things. The next day, I left the town and made my way back to a bigger city, where I felt safer. The experience left me shaken and wary of traveling alone. I couldn't believe how quickly a simple trip had turned into a nightmare. I was grateful to be alive and knew I would never forget the terror of that night. Now, I am much more careful when traveling. I always stay in well-known areas and keep my phone close. I was working the night shift at the 24-hour gas station. It was always quiet around 3 a.m., with only the occasional truck driver stopping for gas or coffee. That night felt different, though. The air seemed heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I was behind the counter, restocking cigarettes and gum, when I saw a man walk in. He had a hood pulled up, covering most of his face. I felt a chill run down my spine. He walked straight up to the counter, and I could see his eyes were darting around nervously. "Hey," he said, his voice low and gruff. "Open the register." I froze for a moment, then slowly moved to the register. I had dealt with difficult customers before, but this felt different. As I started to open the drawer, he pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. "Hurry up," he said, his voice shaking slightly. I fumbled with the register, trying to keep my hands steady. I handed him the cash, hoping that would be enough to make him leave. But he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me. "Open the safe," he demanded. I felt my heart drop. I didn't have the code to the safe. Only the manager had access to it, and he wouldn't be in until morning. I tried to explain this to the man, but he didn't believe me. "Stop lying," he said, waving the gun in my face. "I know you have the code. Open it now, or I'll shoot." I started to panic. I could see the desperation in his eyes. He wasn't thinking straight. I tried to stay calm and explained again that I didn't have the code. He didn't want to hear it. "Get on the floor," he ordered. "Hands behind your head." I did as he said, my mind racing. I had to find a way out of this. I remembered the silent alarm button under the counter. If I could just reach it, maybe the police would come in time. He kept the gun trained on me as he walked around the counter. He grabbed my arm and pulled me up, pushing me towards the back room. My mind was screaming, trying to figure out a way to hit the alarm without him noticing. He pushed me into the back room and closed the door behind us. He was getting more agitated by the minute. He demanded again that I open the safe. I kept telling him I couldn't, but he was past listening. He started pacing, the gun still in his hand. I saw my chance. While he was distracted, I inched towards the door, trying to keep my movements slow and unnoticed. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I made it to the door and slowly reached for the handle. Just as I was about to open it, he turned around and saw me. He lunged at me, grabbing my arm and pulling me back into the room. "Where do you think you're going?" he shouted, his face inches from mine. I could smell his breath, a mix of alcohol and desperation. I didn't have time to think. I swung my arm up, hitting him in the face with my elbow. He stumbled back, surprised. I took my chance and bolted up the door, running towards the front of the store. I dove behind the counter and hit the silent alarm button. The man was right behind me, grabbing at my legs and trying to pull me out. I kicked and screamed, hoping someone would hear me. He finally managed to drag me out from behind the counter. He was furious now, his face red and his eyes wild. He pointed the gun at me again, but before he could say anything, I heard sirens in the distance. He looked towards the door, panic setting in. He knew he didn't have much time. He grabbed the cash from the register and ran out of the store, disappearing into the night. I stayed on the floor, shaking and crying, until the police arrived. They found me there, scared and exhausted. I told them everything, and they promised to find the man who did this. That night changed me. I never worked a night shift again, and I still jump at every loud noise. The police never caught the man, but I try to take comfort in the fact that I survived. I was volunteering at a disaster relief site after a massive flood had hit our town. People lost their homes, and some lost everything. It felt good to help, to hand out supplies, and to see the relief on people's faces when they got something they needed. I was working long hours, but it was worth it. One evening, I was organizing donations in the back of the warehouse. It was getting late, and most of the other volunteers had gone home. I was about to leave when I heard voices coming from the office. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something in their tone made me stop and listen. "We can't keep hiding this," one voice said. It was tense, almost frantic. "Relax," another voice replied. "No one will find out. We have everything under control." I recognized the second voice. It was the head of the relief organization, Mr. Dawson. He was well respected in the community, known for his charity work. Hearing him sound so cold sent a shiver down my spine. I waited until the voices stopped and the office door opened. I quickly hid behind a stack of boxes and watched as Mr. Dawson and another man I didn't recognize walked out. They were carrying a small, heavy-looking box. Once they left, I crept into the office. My heart was pounding, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found documents spread out on the desk. I saw spreadsheets, invoices, and bank statements. Something caught my eye, a list of donations that didn't match the supplies we had been giving out. It looked like a significant amount of money and goods were missing. I took a few photos with my phone, my hands shaking. As I was about to leave, I heard footsteps. I barely had time to eye behind the door when it opened, and Mr. Dawson walked back in. He was talking on his phone. Yes, we moved the funds. No one suspects a thing, he said. We'll make another transfer tomorrow. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. After what felt like an eternity, he left again. I slipped out of the office and ran to my car. My mind was racing. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just ignore what I had found, but I was scared of what might happen if they found out I knew. The next day, I decided to confront one of the other volunteers I trusted, Sarah. She had been there as long as I had and seemed like someone who would know what to do. I showed her the photos, and her face went pale. "This is bad," she whispered. "We need to go to the police." We agreed to meet at the police station after our shifts. That day at the relief site felt like it dragged on forever. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to figure out what I had done. Mr. Dawson was there, acting normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something was up. Finally, my shift ended, and I met Sarah outside. We drove to the police station together. We told the officer on duty everything, showed him the photos, and handed over the documents. He took it seriously and assured us they would investigate. I thought that would be the end of it, but things took a darker turn. The next day, I noticed a black car following me. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, but then I saw the same car outside my house that night. I called Sarah to warn her, but she didn't answer. Panic started to set in. I decided to stay with a friend for a few days. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My phone rang, and I saw it was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered it. "You're in over your head," a voice said. It was Mr. Dawson. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." I hung up, my hands trembling. I called the police again and told them about the threat. They promised to send someone to check on me, but I didn't feel safe. The following day, I heard that Sarah had gone missing. Her family was frantic, and the police were involved. I knew it was connected to what we had found. I felt guilty, terrified, and helpless. Desperate, I went back to the relief site to look for more evidence. I needed something concrete to bring these people down. As I was searching through the office again, I heard footsteps. This time, I couldn't hide in time. Mr. Dawson and the other man from before caught me. They grabbed me, and I tried to fight, but they were too strong. They dragged me into a back room and tied me to a chair. Mr. Dawson leaned in close, his face twisted with anger. "You should have stayed out of it," he hissed. "Now you're going to disappear, just like your friend." I was terrified, but I couldn't give up. I remembered the silent alarm button I had seen near the entrance earlier. If I could just get free and reach it, maybe I had a chance. They left me alone for a moment, probably to figure out what to do with me. I struggled against the ropes, and finally, I managed to loosen them enough to slip one hand free. I quietly worked on the other hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I heard them coming back, and I knew I had only seconds. I freed my other hand and ran for the door. They saw me and shouted, but I didn't look back. I sprinted to the front of the building and slammed my hand on the silent alarm button. The alarm rang out, louder than I expected. Panic set in as I heard them closing in. I grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby table and swung it at the first man who reached me. He went down, and I kept running. Sirens wailed in the distance, and I felt a glimmer of hope. The police arrived just as Mr. Dawson lunged at me. They pulled him off and handcuffed him, along with his accomplice. I collapsed on the ground, shaking and exhausted. The police took my statement and reassured me that I was safe now. They found Sarah alive, though shaken, and arrested several others involved in the corruption. It took me a long time to recover from that night. The relief site was shut down, and the community was outraged when the truth came out. I never volunteered there again, but I learned to trust my instincts and stay vigilant. I still think about that night sometimes, about how close I came to disappearing. My car broke down late at night on a deserted highway. It was just my luck. I had been driving back from a friend's house, and I was miles away from the nearest town. My phone had no signal, and the darkness around me was oppressive. I felt completely alone. I tried to stay calm and think about what to do next. I was sitting in my car for about an hour when I saw headlights approaching in the distance. A vehicle was coming towards me. As it got closer, I could see it was an RV. It slowed down and stopped next to my car. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, rolled down his window. "Car trouble?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound less desperate than I felt. "It just died on me." No signal on my phone either. "Hop in," he said. "I can give you a ride to the next town. There's a mechanic there who can help you." I hesitated for a moment, but then decided I had no other options. I grabbed my bag and got into his RV. The interior was neat and clean, and it looked comfortable. He introduced himself as Bob and asked me where I was headed. I told him about my situation, and he nodded sympathetically. We drove for a while, and Bob made small talk. He seemed nice enough, but something about him felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. After about half an hour, he said he needed to pull over for a bit to check something in the back. I offered to help, but he insisted it was fine. He parked the RV on the side of the road and got out. I watched him disappear into the darkness behind the vehicle. Minutes passed, and he didn't return. I started to feel uneasy. I decided to get out and see what was taking so long. As soon as I stepped out of the RV, I felt a hand grab me from behind. Bob's friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory look. He shoved me back into the RV and locked the door. "Sit down," he ordered, his voice now menacing. I complied, my heart racing. He walked over to the driver's seat and started the engine. As he drove, I tried to think of a way to escape. The windows were locked, and the door had been reinforced from the inside. I was trapped. We drove for what felt like hours. Eventually, he pulled off the main road and down a narrow, winding path. Trees closed in on both sides, and I knew we were heading into the middle of nowhere. I tried to talk to him, to reason with him, but he ignored me. Finally, we arrived at a small clearing deep in the woods. He turned off the engine and got up, motioning for me to follow him. He led me to a small, dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. Inside, it was even worse. The place was filled with old, broken furniture and a heavy, musty smell. He locked the door behind us and turned to face me. "You shouldn't have gotten into my RV," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now, you're mine." I felt a surge of panic. I had to get out of there. While he was distracted, I grabbed a rusty metal lamp from a nearby table and swung it at him. It hit him on the side of the head, and he stumbled back, dazed. I didn't wait to see if he recovered. I ran for the door, fumbling with the lock. Just as I got it open, he grabbed me from behind. I twisted and kicked, managing to break free. I sprinted into the woods, branches scratching in my face and arms. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush. I pushed myself to run faster, adrenaline fueling my escape. The forest was dense and dark, and I quickly lost my sense of direction. I just kept running, hoping to find a road or some kind of help. Eventually, I stumbled onto a small dirt road. I could see headlights in the distance, and I waved my arms frantically, praying the driver would see me. The car slowed down and stopped. A couple got out and rushed over to me. "Are you okay?" the woman asked, concern in her eyes. "Help me," I gasped. "There's a man. He's trying to kill me." They ushered me into their car and drove me to the nearest town. We went straight to the police station, where I told them everything. They took my statement and sent officers to search the area. It took a while, but they eventually found Bob's RV and the cabin. He was gone, though, vanished into the night. They assured me they would keep looking, but I knew deep down that he was still out there somewhere. I never found out what happened to him, but the experience changed me. I went on a hunting trip with my friends last fall. It was supposed to be a fun weekend in the mountains, just a bunch of us guys enjoying the outdoors. We set up camp near a dense forest and planned to spend the next few days hunting deer. The first day went well. We didn't catch anything, but we enjoyed the hike and the scenery. On the second day, I decided to go off on my own. I wanted to explore a bit and maybe find a good spot where the deer might be hiding. I told my friends I'd be back by evening and set off into the forest. I walked for a couple of hours, enjoying the quiet and the fresh air. But as the sun started to set, I realized I had no idea where I was. I tried to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. The forest seemed different, darker, and more confusing. I started to panic a little, but I kept walking, hoping to find a landmark or a path. That's when I saw the cabin. It was an old, rundown place, half hidden by the trees. I was relieved to see it, thinking I could ask for directions or at least use a phone. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The place was a mess. It looked like no one had lived there for years. There were old, broken furniture and dusty shelves. But then I heard a noise from the back of the cabin, like someone moving around. I called out, but no one responded. I walked further in, and that's when I saw him. A man, maybe in his 50s, with wild hair and a scruffy beard. He looked at me with cold, dark eyes. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice rough and angry. I tried to explain that I was lost and just needed help finding my way back to my camp. But he didn't seem to care. He stepped closer, and I could see a knife in his hand. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "People like you don't belong in these woods." Before I could react, he grabbed me and threw me to the ground. He tied my hands behind my back with a rope and dragged me out of the cabin. I struggled, but he was strong and determined. He took me to a small shed behind the cabin and locked me inside. The shed was dark and cold. There was nothing in there but a pile of old blankets and some rusty tools. I tried to free my hands, but the rope was too tight. I shouted for help, but no one could hear me. I was completely alone. Hours passed, and I started to lose hope. The man hadn't come back, and I had no idea how long I would be stuck there. I thought about my friends, wondering if they were looking for me. I felt so helpless and scared. Just when I was starting to give up, I heard footsteps outside the shed. The door creaked open, and the man stepped inside. He had a sinister smile on his face. "Ready to go for a walk?" he asked, yanking me to my feet. He led me out into the forest, keeping a tight grip on the rope. I didn't know where he was taking me, but I knew it wasn't good. We walked for what felt like miles until we reached a clearing. There was a large hole in the ground, like a shallow grave. "Get in," he ordered, pushing me towards the hole. I knew if I got in, I wouldn't be getting out. I had to do something. I mustered all my strength and kicked him as hard as I could. He stumbled back, giving me a chance to run. I bolted into the forest, the rope still tied around my wrists. I ran as fast as I could, branches scratching my face and tearing at my clothes. I could hear him chasing me, shouting and cursing. I didn't look back. I just kept running, hoping to find help or at least a place to hide. Eventually, I saw a light through the trees. I ran towards it and found myself at a road. I flagged down a passing car, and the driver stopped to help me. I told him what had happened, and he called the police. They found the cabin and the man, but he was long gone. They searched the area, but there was no sign of him. My friends were relieved to see me safe, but the experience haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't managed to escape. I never went hunting again after that. The woods, once a place of peace and adventure, had become a place of nightmares for me. I still have nightmares about that man, his cold eyes, and the hole he dug for me. But I'm grateful to be alive and to have made it out of those woods. I agreed to babysit for the Seabrooks while they went out for a rare night alone. They had rented a beautiful beachside home for a week, and I was thrilled to spend the evening there. The house was perfect, with big windows overlooking the ocean, and the sound of waves crashing outside. The evening started out normally. I made dinner for little Emma and put her to bed around 8. The Seabrooks had mentioned that she liked to listen to the ocean sounds as she fell asleep, so I left her window slightly open. After she was asleep, I settled in the living room with a book. Around 9, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like someone walking on the gravel path leading to the house. I got up and looked out the window but didn't see anyone. I told myself it was just my imagination and went back to my book. About half an hour later, I heard the noise again. This time, it was louder, and I was sure it was footsteps. I felt a chill run down my spine. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. I didn't want to call the Seabrooks and ruin their night out, so I decided to wait and see if it happened again. At 10, I heard a soft knock on the front door. My heart started pounding. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. There was a man standing outside. He looked disheveled, with messy hair and dirty clothes. He knocked again, louder this time. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this the Seabrooks' house?" he asked. His voice was rough and sounded almost desperate. "Who are you?" I asked, not opening the door. "I need to speak with Mr. Seabrook," he said. "It's urgent." I didn't like the sound of this. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone. I was about to call the Seabrooks when I heard the man trying the doorknob. I froze. He was trying to get in. I ran to the back of the house and locked myself in the bathroom. I dialed Mr. Seabrook's number with shaking hands. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Seabrook, there's a man outside," I whispered. "He's trying to get in." There was a pause. Then, he said, "Stay where you are. Don't open the door. I'm calling the police." "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. "I have a restraining order against a stalker. He's dangerous. We thought we'd be safe here." My blood ran cold. I heard a loud crash from the front of the house. The man had broken a window. I could hear him moving around inside, searching for us. "I'm scared," I whispered. "Stay hidden," Mr. Seabrook said. "The police are on their way." I heard footsteps coming down the hall. They stopped outside the bathroom door. The doorknob rattled. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't get in. The door shook as he tried to force it open. "Come out," the man shouted. "I know you're in there." I heard sirens in the distance. The man cursed and ran back down the hall. I heard him leave through the broken window. I stayed in the bathroom, too scared to move, until I heard the police arrive. They found the man hiding in the bushes outside. He was arrested and taken away. The Seabrooks came home immediately, apologizing over and over for not telling me about the restraining order. They had hoped to keep it a secret so I wouldn't be scared. I stayed with them until the window was repaired, then went home. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to being hurt. The Seabrooks cut their vacation short and went back to the city, where they felt safer. I never babysat for them again. The experience left me too shaken. I still think about that night sometimes, wondering what might have happened if the police hadn't arrived in time. I'm just glad I got out safe. Out in the dense wilderness of the Florida Everglades, my friend and I thought we had found the perfect spot for some stealth camping. It seemed like the ideal escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. Little did we know, our peaceful getaway would soon turn into a nightmare. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness descended upon the swampy landscape, we settled down in our makeshift campsite, surrounded by the sounds of nocturnal creatures and the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to creep over us, a feeling that we were not alone in the wilderness. It started with distant noises, faint whispers, and the occasional splash of water in the darkness. At first, we dismissed them as the normal sounds of the Everglades, but as they grew closer and more insistent, we began to realize that something was not right. Then, out of the darkness, emerged a figure, tall and imposing, moving with a stealthy grace that sent shivers down our spines. He approached our campsite with purpose, his eyes glinting in the dim light of our campfire, and we knew in an instant that he was not someone to be trifled with. He introduced himself as a smuggler, using the vast expanse of the Everglades to hide his illicit activities from prying eyes. He warned us to stay out of his way, threatening dire consequences if we dared to interfere with his operations. We were frozen with fear, unsure of what to do next. Should we try to reason with him? Or should we make a run for it and hope to escape his clutches? Our minds raced with possibilities as we weighed our options, but in the end, we knew that we were no match for this dangerous man and his criminal enterprise. As the smuggler loomed over us, his presence casting a dark shadow over our campsite, we realized that we had no choice but to comply with his demands. We watched helplessly as he went about his business, moving with a ruthless efficiency that left us feeling powerless and vulnerable. But even as we cowered in fear, a small spark of defiance flickered within us. We refused to let this man intimidate us, to rob us of our freedom and our dignity. And so, when the opportunity presented itself, we seized it with both hands, mustering all of our courage and strength to confront our tormentor head-on. In a moment of desperation, we made a run for it, tearing through the dense underbrush of the Everglades with the smuggler hot on our heels. Adrenaline coursed through our veins as we raced through the darkness, our hearts pounding with fear and determination. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a hidden path, leading us to safety and salvation. With renewed energy and resolve, we pushed forward, putting as much distance between us and our pursuer as possible. And then, finally, we saw it, the faint glow of civilization on the horizon, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With one final burst of speed, we sprinted towards it, our lungs burning and our muscles aching, until at last, we reached the safety of civilization. As we collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath and shaking with exhaustion, we knew that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. But even as we celebrated our victory, we couldn't shake the feeling that the smuggler was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. And so, as we made our way back to civilization, we vowed to never return to the Everglades again, to put this harrowing ordeal behind us and move on with our lives. I was driving through rural Georgia, rain pouring down so hard I could barely see the road ahead. My windshield wipers were on full speed, but it didn't help much. I was tense, gripping the steering wheel tightly. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to reach my motel and get some rest. Up ahead, I saw a car on the side of the road, hazard lights flashing. A woman stood next to it, waving her arms frantically. She looked drenched and desperate. I hesitated for a moment, but then I decided to pull over. It didn't feel right to leave her out there in the storm. I rolled down my window a crack. "Do you need help?" I shouted over the sound of the rain. "Yes, please," she called back. "My car won't start. Can you give me a ride to the nearest gas station?" I nodded and unlocked the passenger door. She climbed in, dripping water all over the seat. I noticed she was shivering, and her clothes were soaked through. I felt a pang of sympathy. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been out there for almost an hour." "No problem," I replied, trying to be reassuring. "Where's the nearest gas station?" "Just a few miles down the road," she said. "It's not far." I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. The rain was relentless, hammering against the roof and windows. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the tension in the car palpable. Suddenly, I noticed movement in my rearview mirror. A dark figure appeared from the shadows, running towards my car. I barely had time to react before the back door was yanked open, and a man climbed in, brandishing a gun. "Don't move," he snarled, pointing the weapon at me. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at him, fear gripping me. "Keep driving," the woman ordered, her tone now cold and commanding. "Do exactly as we say, and you won't get hurt." I nodded, my hand shaking on the wheel. I felt trapped, panic rising as I realized I had fallen into a trap. They had planned this, using the woman as bait. "Where do you want me to go?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Turn left up ahead," the man instructed. "There's a dirt road. Take it." I did as I was told, my mind racing. I had to find a way out of this. The dirt road was muddy and slick, making it hard to keep control of the car. We drove for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. "Stop here," the woman said abruptly. I brought the car to a halt, my heart pounding. The man kept the gun trained on me as the woman got out, motioning for me to follow. "Get out," she commanded. I slowly opened my door and stepped into the rain, the mud sucking at my shoes. They led me to a small clearing, where two more men were waiting by an old, beat-up van. "Hand over your keys," the man with the gun ordered. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling them out and tossing them to him. He caught them and handed them to one of the other men. "Take his car," he said. "We'll deal with him here." Panic surged through me. I knew I had to act fast. As they turned towards the van, I made a split-second decision. I bolted, sprinting into the trees. Shouts erupted behind me, and I heard the sound of footsteps chasing after me. The forest was dense, branches scratching in my face and clothes as I ran. I stumbled over roots and rocks, the rain making everything slippery. My lungs burned, but I didn't dare stop. I could hear them behind me, getting closer. I spotted a large fallen tree up ahead and dove behind it, trying to catch my breath. I listened, my heart pounding in my ears. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. I heard them cursing, their voices angry and frustrated. "Spread out," one of them shouted. "He can't have gone far." I stayed as still as possible, praying they wouldn't find me. I could hear them moving through the forest, searching. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. I needed a plan. I noticed a small creek nearby, its water rushing from the rain. An idea formed in my mind. If I could follow the creek, maybe I could lose them and find my way back to the road. I waited until their voices faded a bit, then carefully crept towards the water. I moved as quietly as I could, the sound of the creek covering my footsteps. The cold water soaked through my shoes, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I followed the creek for what felt like an eternity, my senses on high alert for any sign of my pursuers. Finally, I saw a break in the trees up ahead. I picked up the pace, hoping it was the road. As I emerged from the forest, relief washed over me. The road was just a few yards away. I scrambled up the embankment and onto the pavement, looking around frantically. There was no sign of the carjackers. I started running down the road, not sure where I was going, just needing to put as much distance between myself and them as possible. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms, praying it was someone who could help. The car slowed down and stopped beside me. An older man rolled down the window, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. I was attacked." "Get in," he said, unlocking the door. "I'll take you to the nearest police station." I climbed into the car, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back, half expecting to see the carjackers emerge from the darkness. But the road remained empty. At the police station, I told them everything. They took my statement and assured me they would search for the criminals. I knew it would be difficult to catch them, but I was grateful to be safe. That night, as I lay in a cheap motel room, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to losing everything. The rain still pounded against the window, a reminder of the terrifying encounter I had survived. I was driving through the Midwest, on my way to visit family. It was a long drive, and I needed a break, so I pulled into a rest area. It was one of those desolate places, just a couple of picnic tables and a bathroom, surrounded by flat, empty land. There were only a few other cars around, most of them parked far from each other. I got out, stretched my legs, and decided to use the restroom. As I walked back to my car, I noticed something odd. There was a truck parked off to the side, away from the other vehicles. The back of the truck was slightly open, and I thought I heard a faint noise coming from inside. It sounded like someone crying. I walked a little closer, trying not to be too obvious. The crying got louder, and I could make out words. It was a woman's voice, begging for help. My heart started pounding. I knew something was very wrong. I looked around, but there was no one else in sight. I had to make a decision quickly. I couldn't just leave her there. I took a deep breath and approached the truck. As I got closer, I could see through the gap in the back. There was a woman inside, tied up and gagged. She looked terrified. I tried to open the door quietly, but it creaked loudly. The woman's eyes widened, and she started shaking her head, trying to warn me. Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw 3 men walking towards me. They didn't look friendly. "What do you think you're doing?" one of them asked, his voice low and threatening. He was tall and muscular, with a scar running down his face. I tried to stay calm. I heard someone crying. I was just checking if everything was okay. The man with the scar stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Everything's fine. Mind your own business." I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't just leave the woman. I took a step back, trying to think of a plan. The men must have sensed my hesitation because they closed in on me, cutting off my escape route. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, raising my hands. "Just let the woman go, and I'll leave." The man with the scar laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "It's too late for that." Before I could react, he lunged at me, grabbing my arm. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. The other 2 men grabbed me, pinning my arms behind my back. I struggled, but it was no use. They dragged me to the truck and threw me inside with the woman. She was crying harder now, her eyes full of fear. The men shut the door, plunging us into darkness. I could hear them talking outside, their voices muffled. I turned to the woman, trying to untie her gag. "We're going to get out of here," I whispered, though I wasn't sure how. My mind was racing, trying to come up with a plan. The knots were tight, but I managed to loosen them enough to pull the gag off. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're dangerous. We have to get out of here." I nodded, my heart pounding. I could hear the men outside, arguing about what to do with us. I knew we didn't have much time. I felt around in the darkness, looking for anything that could help us escape. My fingers brushed against a metal tool, maybe a tire iron. I grabbed it, hoping it would be enough. The door suddenly swung open, and the light blinded me for a moment. One of the men climbed in, his face twisted in anger. "Time to shut you up," he growled, reaching for the woman. I swung the tire iron with all my strength, hitting him in the side of the head. He stumbled back, cursing. I didn't wait for him to recover. I grabbed the woman's hand and pulled her out of the truck. We ran towards my car, but the other 2 men were already coming after us. I could hear their footsteps pounding on the pavement, getting closer. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door. My hands were shaking, and I could barely get the key into the lock. Finally, the door opened, and we both scrambled inside. I locked the doors and started the engine, my heart racing. The men reached the car just as I pulled away, pounding on the windows and shouting. I floored the gas pedal, speeding out of the rest area. My mind was in a blur as I drove, trying to put as much distance between us and them as possible. The woman was sobbing beside me, her hands shaking. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you." We drove for what felt like hours, not daring to slow down. Eventually, we reached a small town and pulled into a gas station. I called the police and told them everything. They sent officers to the rest area, but by the time they got there, the men were gone. The woman told me her name was Emily. She had been kidnapped a few days earlier and didn't know where they were taking her. The police took our statements and promised to do everything they could to find the men. It was a long, terrifying night, but we were safe. I still have nightmares about what could have happened, but I'm grateful I stopped at that rest area. If I hadn't, Emily might still be out there, trapped in that truck. It was just another night at the remote data center where I worked. I was responsible for maintaining the servers and ensuring everything ran smoothly. But tonight, something felt off. I noticed the lights flickering, followed by a sudden power outage. It was unusual for this to happen, especially in a place like this where backup generators were supposed to kick in automatically. I grabbed my flashlight and headed towards the power room to investigate. As I made my way through the darkened corridors, my heart began to race with unease. When I reached the power room, I found the door ajar. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, shining my flashlight around the room. To my horror, I saw a group of intruders huddled around the main power switch, trying to disable it. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by masks. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let them steal sensitive information from the servers or cause any further damage to the data center. I crept forward, trying to remain as quiet as possible. But one of the intruders must have heard me, because he turned around suddenly, his eyes wide with surprise. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as we locked eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved, paralyzed by the sudden realization that we were not alone in the room. But then, without warning, the intruder lunged towards me, his hands reaching out to grab me. I stumbled backwards, narrowly avoiding his grasp. I knew I had to get out of there and alert the authorities before it was too late. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty corridors. I could hear the intruders shouting behind me as I made my way towards the exit. I prayed that I would make it out of there alive, that I would be able to get help before they caught up to me. Finally, I burst through the doors and into the cool night air, gasping for breath as I stumbled out into the parking lot. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 as quickly as my shaking hands would allow. I told the operator what had happened, trying to remain as calm as possible despite the terror that still gripped me. I gave them the location of the data center and begged them to send help as soon as possible. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that washed over me. I knew those intruders were still inside, still trying to steal whatever they could get their hands on. But I refused to let fear consume me. I had done everything I could to stop them, and now it was up to the authorities to apprehend them and bring them to justice. When the police finally arrived, I led them back to the data center, where they found the intruders still inside, attempting to access the servers. With the help of the police, we were able to apprehend them and put an end to their criminal activities once and for all. It was a relief to know that they would no longer pose a threat to the data center or its sensitive information. The storm hit us hard about an hour into the ferry ride. The sky turned dark, and the waves started tossing the boat around like a toy. I was on the upper deck, trying to keep my balance while watching the water crash against the sides. It was supposed to be a routine trip across the bay, but this storm came out of nowhere. I decided to go inside and find a seat. The cabin was crowded with people trying to escape the weather. I found an empty spot near the back and sat down, wiping the rain off my face. The air was thick with the smell of wet clothes and anxiety. Everyone was nervous, and the storm wasn't helping. I noticed a man sitting across from me. He was wearing a dark coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Something about him seemed off. He kept glancing around, fidgeting with a small black bag on his lap. Every few minutes, he'd look at his watch and then back at the bag. It made me uneasy. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid because of the storm. But I couldn't stop watching him. He looked around again, and this time our eyes met. He quickly looked away, stuffing the bag under his seat. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I got up and moved closer, pretending to stretch my legs. From my new spot, I could see the bag better. It was partially open, and I caught a glimpse of wires and a small device inside. My heart started pounding. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I decided to find a crew member. I walked towards the front of the cabin, trying to act casual. I spotted a crew member near the entrance, talking to a couple of passengers. I waited until he was alone, then approached him. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low. "I need to talk to you. It's important." He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "What's the matter?" "There's a man back there," I said, nodding towards the back of the cabin. "He has a bag with some kind of device in it. It looks dangerous." The crew member's expression changed. He glanced towards the back, then back at me. "Stay here," he said. "I'll take care of it." He walked away quickly, and I watched as he approached the man. The man saw him coming and grabbed the bag, standing up. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the man was shaking his head, trying to walk away. The crew member blocked his path, and that's when the man shoved him and started running. Panic erupted in the cabin. People were screaming and trying to get out of the way. I followed the man, pushing through the crowd. He ran down a narrow corridor, heading towards the lower deck. I didn't know what I was doing, but I couldn't let him get away. I caught up to him just as he reached the stairs. He turned and saw me, his eyes wide with fear and anger. He reached into the bag, and I saw the glint of a knife. I backed up, holding my hands up. "Stay back," he said, his voice shaking. "Just stay back." I didn't move. He turned and ran down the stairs, and I followed at a distance. The lower deck was mostly empty, and the sound of the storm was louder down here. I saw him disappear into a storage room, and I knew I had to act fast. I looked around and saw a fire extinguisher on the wall. I grabbed it and crept towards the storage room. I could hear him inside, rummaging through the bag. I took a deep breath and swung the door open, spraying the extinguisher at him. He shouted and dropped the bag, trying to shield himself. I charged at him, hitting him with the extinguisher. He fell to the ground, and I grabbed the bag, running out of the room. I didn't stop until I reached the upper deck, where I found the crew member I had talked to earlier. He took the bag from me and called for backup. Within minutes, more crew members arrived and restrained the man. They searched the bag and found a homemade explosive device. The police were called, and they took the man into custody when we reached the shore. The rest of the trip was a blur. I was shaken, but relieved that it was over. The crew thanked me for my help, and I was given a voucher for a free trip as a reward. But I knew I wouldn't be taking any more ferries for a long time. The memory of that man's eyes, the fear and anger in them, still haunts me. I'm just glad I trusted my instincts and acted before it was too late. So, I'm this guy who's always looking for adventure, you know? I love getting out into the great outdoors and exploring new places. That's why I decided to take a trip to the Pacific Northwest, where I heard there are some amazing hidden gems just waiting to be discovered. One day, I stumbled upon this remote mountain road that seemed like the perfect place to explore. The scenery was breathtaking, with towering trees and rugged cliffs stretching as far as the eye could see. As I drove deeper into the wilderness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was like I could sense someone or something lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. Suddenly, I heard the sound of gunshots echoing through the trees, sending a chill down my spine. I knew I had to be careful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that washed over me. That's when I saw them, a group of rough-looking men emerging from the forest, their faces twisted into sinister grins. It was clear from the looks in their eyes that they viewed me as nothing more than prey in their deadly game. With adrenaline pumping through my veins, I knew I had to think fast if I wanted to survive. I floored the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced down the winding mountain road, desperate to escape the hunters hot on my trail. But no matter how fast I drove, it felt like they were always one step ahead of me, their shouts and laughter echoing in the distance. It was like they were toying with me, enjoying the thrill of the chase as they closed in for the kill. As I rounded a sharp bend in the road, I saw a steep drop-off looming ahead, with jagged rocks waiting to greet me below. I knew I had to make a split-second decision if I wanted to survive. With no other options left, I slammed on the brakes and swerved off the road, my car careening over the edge of the cliff in a cloud of dust and debris. As I plummeted towards the ground below, I braced myself for impact, praying that I would make it out alive. Miraculously, I survived the fall, though my car was left a mangled wreck at the bottom of the cliff. With adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I stumbled out of the wreckage and into the dense forest, desperate to put as much distance between me and the hunters as possible. For hours, I trudged through the wilderness, my muscles aching and my heart pounding in my chest. Every rustle of leaves and snapping twigs sent me into a panic, fearing that the hunters were still hot on my trail. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, I finally stumbled upon a clearing where I could catch my breath and collect my thoughts. I knew I couldn't stay in one place for long, but I needed a moment to rest and gather my strength before pressing on. As night fell and the forest grew cloaked in darkness, I huddled beneath the shelter of a towering tree, my eyes darting nervously to and fro in search of any signs of danger. I knew I couldn't let my guard down for a second if I wanted to make it out of this alive. Hours passed in agonizing silence, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a wolf. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of madness, my mind racing with thoughts of the horrors that awaited me if the hunters found me. But just as I was about to lose hope, I heard the distant rumble of an engine in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. It was the sound of salvation, the promise of rescue from the nightmare that had consumed me. With a newfound sense of determination, I rose to my feet and followed the sound of the approaching vehicle, my heart pounding with anticipation. And as the headlights pierced the darkness and bathed me in their warm glow, I knew that I had finally made it out alive. In the end, I may have escaped with my life, but the memory of that harrowing encounter will haunt me forever. It's a stark reminder of the dangers that lurk in the wild, waiting to ensnare unsuspecting adventurers like me in their deadly trap. So, I gotta share this crazy thing that happened to me. I work as a social worker, and one day, I had to drive out to this remote farmhouse to check on a family in trouble. Seemed routine enough, you know? Anyway, I hop in my car and head out there. The drive was long, and the farmhouse was out in the middle of nowhere. I remember feeling kinda uneasy as I got closer, like something just wasn't right. When I finally pull up to the house, though, my heart drops. It's quiet, too quiet. And there are signs of a struggle everywhere, broken furniture, stuff knocked over, you name it. I start to get this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I've stumbled into something way worse than I bargained for. But I push those thoughts aside and try to focus on what I need to do. I get out of my car and cautiously approach the house. The door's wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I call out, but there's no response, just silence. I step inside, and that's when things start to get really messed up. The place is a wreck, like a tornado came through or something. And there's blood, lots of it, splattered all over the walls and floor. My heart's racing now, and I can feel the panic rising in my chest. I know I should call the cops, but something's holding me back. Maybe it's the fear of what I might find, or maybe it's just shock. I start to search the house, calling out for anyone who might still be there. But there's nobody, just me and the eerie silence. Then, out of nowhere, I hear this faint sound coming from upstairs, like someone crying. My blood runs cold as I slowly make my way up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I reach the top and follow the sound to one of the bedrooms. And that's when I see her, a young girl, huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. I rush over to her, asking if she's okay, but she's too scared to even speak. I try to comfort her as best I can, promising that everything's going to be all right. But deep down, I know it's not. I can feel it in my bones. Whatever happened here, it's not over yet. I scoop the girl up in my arms and make her run for it, not stopping until we're far away from that godforsaken place. I call the cops and tell them everything, praying that they'll be able to make sense of the nightmare I just stumbled into. They arrive soon after, and I hand the girl over to them, feeling like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. But as I watch them drive away, I can't shake the feeling that this is far from over. I may have escaped with my life, but the horrors of that farmhouse will haunt me forever. And I can only hope that whoever did this pays for their crimes, so that no one else has to suffer the way that poor family did. I was driving home from campus late one evening, eager to get back to my dorm and unwind after a long day of classes. The quickest route was through a wooded area, a shortcut I often took to save time. But little did I know, that decision would lead me straight into a nightmare. As I drove deeper into the forest, the trees closed in around me, casting eerie shadows across the road. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket, but I pushed it aside, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, up ahead, I saw them, a group of figures standing in the middle of the road, their faces obscured by dark masks. My heart leaped into my throat as I slammed on the brakes, bringing my car to a screeching halt just a few feet away from the menacing figures. I sat frozen in my seat, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I stared at the masked individuals blocking my path. I could feel their eyes on me, pouring into my soul with a chilling intensity that sent shivers down my spine. For a moment, we just stared at each other, locked in a tense standoff as the silence stretched on. And then, without warning, one of the figures stepped forward, a glint of menace in their eyes as they approached my car. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before things took a turn for the worse. With trembling hands, I fumble for the keys in the ignition, my heart pounding in my chest as I pray for the engine to turn over. But as I tried to start the car, I realized with horror that it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I frantically pumped the gas pedal, willing the engine to come to life, but it was no use. My car was dead, a useless hunk of metal in the face of danger. I was trapped, at the mercy of the masked figures who now surrounded my car, their presence looming over me like a dark cloud. I could hear them whispering to each other in hushed tones, their voices low and menacing as they discussed their next move. I knew I had to think fast, to come up with a plan to escape before it was too late. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons as I tried to dial for help. But as I glanced down at the screen, I realized with a sinking feeling that there was no signal. We were too far off the beaten path, too deep in the heart of the forest for my phone to reach anyone. Desperation clawed at me as I searched for a way out, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. And then, suddenly, a voice broke through the silence, cutting through the darkness like a knife. It was one of the masked figures, their voice low and gravelly as they spoke to me through the closed window of my car. They demanded that I hand over my belongings, threatening me with violence if I refused. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. These people weren't just here to scare me, they were dangerous, and they meant business. But even as fear threatened to overwhelm me, a steely resolve settled over me like a protective shield. I may have been trapped, but I refused to go down without a fight. With trembling hands, I reached for my bag, fumbling for my wallet and phone as I prepared to comply with their demands. But even as I handed over my belongings, I knew that this was far from over. As the masked figures disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone in the silence of the forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle over me like a heavy weight. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter, but the memory of that night would haunt me for years to come. But despite the fear and uncertainty that lingered in the air, I was grateful to be alive. And as I drove away from that dark forest, I made a promise to myself: I would never take shortcuts again, no matter how tempting they may seem. I had been working the graveyard shift at the diner for about 6 months. The hours were long and the pay wasn't great, but it was a job. The place was usually quiet at night, mostly truckers and night owls stopping by for a quick meal. I liked the solitude and the routine. It was a Tuesday night, around 2 a.m., when a group of 5 men walked in. They were loud, laughing and talking in hushed tones that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They looked out of place, dressed too nicely for our little diner. I put on my best smile and walked over to their table with a notepad. "Evening, gentlemen. What can I get for you?" I asked. They barely glanced at the menu. "Coffee, and keep it coming," one of them said. His voice was sharp, commanding. The others nodded in agreement. I poured their coffee and went back to the counter, keeping an eye on them. They seemed restless, looking around the diner as if expecting someone. The atmosphere felt tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the night wore on, they started to get more aggressive. They laughed louder, made crude jokes, and began harassing the other customers. A couple at a nearby table tried to ignore them, but the men wouldn't leave them alone. One of the men, the one who had ordered the coffee, got up and walked over to the couple. "You two having a nice night?" he asked, his tone mocking. The couple looked uncomfortable, and the man put his arm around the woman, pulling her closer. I knew I had to do something. I walked over and tried to intervene. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave them alone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned to me, a cold smile on his face. "Or what?" he asked, taking a step closer. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Or I'll call the police," I said, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. He laughed. "Go ahead. I'd love to see them try and do something about it." The other men at the table laughed too, egging him on. I backed away, my heart pounding. I went to the counter and picked up the phone, dialing 911. As the phone rang, I saw one of the men stand up and walk towards me. I turned away, hoping the police would answer quickly. 911, what's your emergency?" the operator said. I spoke quickly, trying to keep my voice low. "I'm at the diner on Route 5. There's a group of men here harassing customers. I need help." The man was getting closer. I turned to face him, holding the phone tightly. "Put the phone down," he said, his voice cold. I did as he said, my hands shaking. The operator was still on the line, but I couldn't speak. The man leaned over the counter, his face inches from mine. "You're making a big mistake," he said. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked back to his table. I picked up the phone again, whispering to the operator, "Please hurry." The men continued their harassment, and I tried to keep the other customers calm. The couple eventually left, clearly frightened. It was just me and the group of men now. One of them got up and walked over to the jukebox, putting on some loud, thumping music. They started to dance, their movements erratic and wild. I stood behind the counter, watching them and praying the police would arrive soon. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a police car outside. The men didn't seem to notice. I ran to the door and waved the officers in. They walked in, and the mood in the diner shifted instantly. The men stopped dancing and turned to face the officers. "Is there a problem here?" one of the officers asked. The man who had threatened me earlier stepped forward. "No problem, officer. We're just having a good time." The officer looked at me, and I nodded slightly, letting him know that wasn't true. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the officer said. The men grumbled but didn't argue. They slowly made their way out of the diner, throwing dirty looks over their shoulders. As soon as they were gone, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The officers stayed for a while, making sure everything was okay. I thanked them profusely, my hands still shaking. They told me to call if anything like that ever happened again, and left. I sat down at the counter, trying to calm my nerves. The diner was quiet again, but the tension lingered in the air. I stayed on edge for the rest of my shift, jumping at every little noise. The night dragged on, and I couldn't wait for the morning to come. When my replacement finally arrived, I was exhausted but relieved. I told her what had happened, and she gave me a sympathetic look. "You did the right thing," she said. "I'm glad you're okay." I nodded, still feeling uneasy. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the men and how quickly things had escalated. I hoped I'd never have to deal with something like that again. The quiet of the night shift was no longer comforting. It was a reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. When I got home, I collapsed into bed, too tired to even eat. I lay there in the dark, replaying the events of the night in my mind. I knew I'd never forget the look in that man's eyes or the way my heart had pounded in my chest. The graveyard shift would never feel the same again. I decided to camp alone on a remote beach in Florida. I wanted to get away from everything for a few days, clear my head, and enjoy some peace. I brought my boat, some supplies, and set up camp right by the water. The first day was perfect. The weather was warm, and the sound of the waves was soothing. I spent the day fishing, swimming, and just relaxing. As the sun set, I made a fire and cooked the fish I caught. I felt at peace, away from the noise and stress of daily life. The night was clear, and the stars were bright. I stayed up for a while, just enjoying the quiet before heading to my tent to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind or an animal, but then I heard it again. It was a soft rustling, like someone walking on the sand. I unzipped my tent and peeked outside, but I couldn't see anything. The fire had died down to embers, and everything was dark. I listened for a while longer, but the sound stopped, so I went back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I felt uneasy. I got out of my tent and walked down to the water. My boat was gone. Panic hit me like a punch in the gut. I looked around and saw footprints all around my tent. They weren't mine. Someone had been here during the night. I tried to calm down and think. I was on a small island, miles from the mainland. Without my boat, I was stranded. I had enough food and water for a couple of days, but after that, I would be in trouble. I had to find a way to escape. I spent the day looking for any sign of my boat. I walked around the entire island, but there was no trace of it. The footprints led to the water and then disappeared. It was like whoever took it vanished into thin air. I felt a growing sense of dread. I was completely alone, and someone had intentionally left me here. That night, I built a larger fire, hoping it would deter anyone from coming near my camp. I didn't sleep much, jumping at every sound. The wind rustled the leaves, and the waves crashed on the shore, but every noise seemed amplified. My mind kept going back to the footprints and the missing boat. The next morning, I decided to explore the island more thoroughly. Maybe there was something I had missed. I found an old path leading into the trees and followed it. It led to a small clearing with an abandoned cabin. It looked like it had been there for years, falling apart and covered in vines. Inside the cabin, I found a few old tools and a dusty, moldy mattress. There was nothing that could help me. As I was about to leave, I noticed a small, carved symbol on the wall. It looked recent, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Someone had been here not long ago. I hurried back to my camp, feeling more paranoid than ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I sat by the fire, clutching a makeshift spear I had fashioned from a piece of driftwood. The hours dragged by, and every shadow seemed to move. Just before dawn, I heard the sound again. Footsteps, coming from the direction of the cabin. I stood up, heart pounding, and peered into the darkness. I could barely make out a figure moving toward me. They stopped at the edge of the firelight, just out of reach. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they took a step forward, into the light. It was a man, his face hidden in the shadows. He just stood there, staring at me. I tightened my grip on the spear, ready to defend myself. "What do you want?" I demanded. Still, no answer. The man just stood there, watching me. Then, without warning, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't follow. I was too scared to move. When the sun finally rose, I felt a small sense of relief. I needed to find a way off this island before the man came back. I decided to build a raft from the driftwood scattered along the beach. It took all day, but I managed to lash together enough pieces to make something that might float. As night fell, I dragged the raft to the water's edge. I didn't know if it would hold, but I had to try. I pushed it into the water and climbed on. It wobbled but stayed afloat. I used a piece of wood as a paddle and started making my way toward the mainland. The water was calm, but the journey was slow. Every splash of the paddle echoed in the silence, and I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the man following me. Hours passed, and I began to lose hope. The mainland still seemed so far away. Just as I was about to give up, I saw lights on the horizon. I paddled with renewed energy, the lights growing brighter and closer. Eventually, I reached the shore, exhausted but alive. I stumbled onto the beach and collapsed, grateful to be off that island. I never found out who the man was or why he took my boat. We rented a remote cabin in the Canadian wilderness for a week-long family vacation. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway. My husband Mark, our 2 kids, Emily and Jake, and I were looking forward to disconnecting from the world and spending quality time together. The cabin was isolated, nestled among tall trees with a beautiful lake nearby. It seemed perfect. The first couple of days were wonderful. We hiked, swam, and fished. The kids were having a blast, and Mark and I enjoyed the break from our busy lives. The nights were quiet, with only the sounds of nature around us. On the third night, everything changed. We were sitting by the fire, roasting marshmallows, when we heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps. Mark went to check but saw nothing. We brushed it off, thinking it might be an animal. A little while later, we heard it again, closer this time. My heart started to race. Mark looked uneasy but tried to keep calm for the kids. Suddenly, the door burst open and 3 men stormed in. They had guns. I grabbed Emily and Jake, pulling them close. Mark tried to reason with them, but they shouted for us to be quiet. One of them, the leader I guessed, told us they needed a place to hide for a while. They were on the run, and we were their unlucky hosts. They tied Mark and me up, keeping the kids close to us. My mind raced with fear and desperation. The leader, a tall man with a scar on his face, told us if we cooperated, we wouldn't get hurt. I tried to believe him, but I could see the coldness in his eyes. They took turns watching us. The other 2 men, both younger, seemed nervous, always glancing out the windows. They spoke in low voices, discussing their plans. I caught bits and pieces, enough to know they were dangerous and desperate. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking of ways to escape but found none. The next morning, the men allowed us to eat breakfast under their watchful eyes. Emily and Jake were scared, clinging to me. Mark tried to stay strong, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. As the day went on, I noticed the men were getting agitated. They argued among themselves, their tempers flaring. I knew we had to do something before things got worse. I whispered to Mark, telling him we needed to find a way out. He nodded, his jaw set in determination. That evening, I noticed one of the younger men seemed more sympathetic. He watched us but didn't seem as hardened as the others. I decided to take a risk. When the other men weren't looking, I whispered to him, begging for help. He looked conflicted but didn't respond. Later, when the leader stepped outside, the sympathetic man came over to me. He said he couldn't let us go but would leave the back door unlocked that night. It was our chance. I thanked him quietly, praying he was telling the truth. That night, once the men fell asleep, I whispered to Mark. We untied ourselves carefully, trying not to make a sound. I held Emily, and Mark carried Jake. We crept to the back door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would wake the men. The door was unlocked, just as the man had promised. We slipped outside into the darkness, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The forest was dense, and we stumbled over roots and branches, but we kept going. We had to put as much distance between us and the cabin as possible. After what felt like hours, we reached the lake. We followed its edge, knowing it would lead us back to civilization. The kids were exhausted, but they were brave, not making a sound. I kept looking back, fearing we were being followed. At dawn, we saw a small fishing boat on the shore. Mark checked it and found it was still functional. We climbed in, and Mark started rowing. I held the kids, trying to keep them calm. The boat moved slowly, but it was taking us away from the nightmare we had just escaped. We reached a small town by midday. We found the local authorities and told them everything. They took us in, gave us food and blankets, and assured us we were safe. The police went to the cabin, but the men were gone. They promised to keep looking for them. We stayed in that town for a couple of days, recovering from the ordeal. The kids had nightmares, and so did we. It took a long time to feel safe again. We never found out what happened to the men, but I hope they were caught and couldn't hurt anyone else. That experience changed us. We were more cautious, more aware of the dangers that could be out there. But we were also more grateful for each other. We had faced a terrifying situation and made it through together. That bond, that strength, stayed with us. We never went back to that cabin or any remote places for vacations again. The wilderness that once seemed so peaceful now felt threatening. We stuck to safer, more populated areas. And every time I hear a noise in the night, I remember the cabin and the men who held us hostage. But I also remember how we escaped, and that gives me strength. I was on a solo road trip, taking a break from work and everything. It felt good to drive through the open roads, with the wind in my hair and the radio playing my favorite songs. After a long day of driving, I decided to find a place to stay for the night. I spotted a small, rundown motel off the highway. It looked old and a bit sketchy, but I was too tired to keep driving. I pulled into the parking lot and went to the front desk. The manager was a rough-looking guy, not very friendly, but he gave me a key to room 7. The room was small and smelled musty, but it had a bed and a shower, and that was enough for me. I locked the door behind me and tried to relax. After a quick shower, I got into bed, thinking I'd watch some TV before falling asleep. But as I flipped through the channels, I heard voices outside. At first, I tried to ignore it, but then I heard a loud argument. Curious and a bit nervous, I turned off the TV and listened closely. The voices were getting louder. It sounded like a group of men arguing. I got up and peeked through the curtains. There were 3 men standing near a black SUV, parked just a few rooms down from mine. They looked angry, gesturing wildly and shouting at each other. I felt a knot in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I decided to stay out of sight and listen. The more I listened, the more I realized they were talking about a drug deal. My heart started pounding. I was in the middle of something dangerous, and I needed to stay out of sight. Suddenly, one of the men pulled out a gun. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a heated argument, this was serious. I backed away from the window, trying to think of what to do. If they saw me, I'd be in big trouble. The shouting turned into a scuffle. I could hear the sounds of a fight, followed by a gunshot. I froze. Someone had been shot, and I was stuck in a room just a few feet away. I needed to get out of there, but how? I decided to sneak out the back window. I grabbed my bag and slowly opened the window, trying to be as quiet as possible. The night was cold and dark, and the only light came from the flickering motel sign. I slipped out and crouched behind a bush, trying to figure out my next move. The men were still shouting, but now it sounded more frantic. I heard another gunshot, and then the sound of a car door slamming. I peeked around the bush and saw the SUV speeding away, leaving one man lying on the ground. He wasn't moving. I had to call the police, but my phone was inside the room. I couldn't go back in there. I decided to make a run for the motel office. Staying low, I moved from bush to bush until I reached the front desk. The manager was gone, but there was a phone on the counter. I picked it up and dialed 911, my hands shaking. 911, what's your emergency? The operator asked. I told them everything I had seen, trying to stay calm. They assured me help was on the way and told me to stay inside and lock the door. I hung up and looked around the empty office. I locked the door and waited, my heart racing. It felt like forever, but finally, I heard sirens. Red and blue lights flashed outside, and I saw several police cars pull into the parking lot. Officers got out, guns drawn, and approached the scene. One of them came to the office door and knocked. I unlocked the door and let him in, telling him everything I knew. He nodded and asked me to stay put while they secured the area. I watched as they checked the rooms and the surrounding area. They found the man on the ground and called for an ambulance, but it was too late for him. The police spent hours at the motel, questioning me and gathering evidence. They thanked me for calling them and told me I had done the right thing. It was almost dawn by the time they finished, and I was exhausted. The manager finally showed up, looking annoyed and confused. He had no idea what had happened, and the police had a lot of questions for him. I decided I didn't want to stay there any longer. I thanked the officers and got back in my car, ready to leave that nightmare behind. As I drove away, the sun was rising, casting a soft glow over the landscape. I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I had witnessed something terrible, but I was safe. I learned to be more careful about where I stayed and to trust my instincts. I was hauling a load through the remote areas of Montana. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the sun set slow, painting the sky with reds and oranges. The road was empty, just me and my truck rumbling along. I had a long drive ahead, and the solitude was both calming and eerie. I saw him standing by the side of the road, thumb out, looking for a ride. He seemed harmless enough, young, scruffy, with a backpack slung over one shoulder. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, but something about the emptiness of the road made me feel sorry for him. Maybe he was stranded. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Just down the road a bit," he replied, a grateful smile spreading across his face. "Thanks for stopping." I nodded and unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in, and I pulled back onto the road. For a while, we made small talk. His name was Jake, and he was trying to get to the next town. He seemed friendly, if a little tired. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the atmosphere in the truck shifted. I started noticing little things. The way his eyes darted around the cab, like he was casing the place. The way he shifted in his seat, his body tensing. My unease grew, but I tried to push it down. Maybe he was just nervous. Or maybe I was just imagining things. Then, out of nowhere, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a knife. My heart leapt into my throat. "Pull over," he said, his voice suddenly cold and hard. "Now!" My mind raced. I kept my hands on the wheel, trying to stay calm. "Look, if it's money you want, I've got some cash." I said, "Pull over," he shouted, pressing the knife against my side. I did as he said, my hands trembling on the wheel. The truck rolled to a stop on the side of the deserted road. He grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the cab, dragging me around to the passenger side. My mind was in a blur. I couldn't believe this was happening. "Get in," he ordered, shoving me into the passenger seat. He climbed into the driver's seat, still holding the knife. I watched as he fumbled with the gears, trying to figure out how to drive the truck. "You don't know how to drive this, do you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glared at me. "Shut up and tell me how." I realized then that this was my chance. If he couldn't drive the truck, he needed me. I had to stay calm and think of a way out. "All right," I said slowly. "I'll show you. Just don't hurt me." He nodded, and I leaned over, pretending to help him with the gears. My mind was racing, looking for an opening. And then I saw it. The emergency brake. In one quick motion, I yanked the brake and shoved the door open, tumbling out onto the gravel. He shouted, lunging after me, but I was already scrambling to my feet. I ran, not looking back, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear him cursing, the sound of him stumbling out of the truck. I had to find somewhere to hide, somewhere to get help. The road was empty, the surrounding field stretching out into darkness. I spotted a small stand of trees and sprinted towards it, praying he wouldn't see me. I crouched behind a tree, trying to catch my breath, listening for any sign of him. The night was silent, the only sound the blood pounding in my ears. I could hear him shouting, but his voice was getting fainter. Maybe he thought I'd run down the road. I waited, every muscle in my body tense. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. Finally, I dared to peek out from behind the tree. The road was empty. The truck was still there, but Jake was nowhere in sight. I had to get back to the truck. It was my only chance. I crept back towards it, every shadow making my heart race. When I reached the cab, I saw the knife lying on the seat. He must have dropped it in his panic. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, and climbed back into the driver's seat. I started the engine, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of him. As I pulled back onto the road, I saw movement in the rearview mirror. Jake was running towards the truck, his face twisted with rage. I floored the gas pedal, the truck lurching forward. He was gaining on me, his footsteps pounding on the gravel. I swerved, trying to shake him off, but he grabbed onto the side mirror, his fingers scrabbling for a hold. I swung the truck back and forth, finally managing to throw him off. He fell, rolling onto the road, and I sped away, my heart pounding. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my hands gripping the wheel so hard they hurt. I pulled into a gas station and called the police, my voice shaking as I told them what had happened. They found Jake a few hours later, wandering along the road, his face bruised and bloodied. They arrested him, and I had to give a statement. It was all a blur, my mind still reeling from the terror of it all. I'm still shaken by what happened. Every time I get behind the wheel, I can feel my heart start to race, the memory of that night still fresh in my mind. I'm just grateful I got out of there alive. It could have ended so much worse. I was driving through the New Mexico desert on a rainy night. The rain was heavy, and the windshield wipers were working overtime. The road was almost invisible, just a long, dark stretch with no other cars in sight. I was on my way to visit an old friend, trying to make up for lost time. The loneliness of the drive was getting to me, but I pushed on, determined to get there before midnight. After a while, I saw headlights ahead, flickering through the downpour. As I got closer, I noticed a car pulled over to the side of the road, hazard lights blinking. A couple of figures were standing near the car, waving their arms. It looked like an accident, so I decided to stop and see if they needed help. I pulled over and got out, the rain instantly soaking me. As I approached, one of the figures, a woman, ran towards me, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Thank you for stopping," she said, her voice shaking. "We had an accident, and my husband is hurt." I glanced at the car. It was dented and the hood was popped open. The other figure, a man, was slumped against the car, holding his side. I felt a pang of concern and walked closer. "Do you need a ride to the nearest town?" I asked. "Yes, please," she replied. "But we need to get my husband out of the car first." I nodded and walked over to the man. As I bent down to help him, I heard a noise behind me. Before I could turn, something hard hit the back of my head, and I fell to the ground, dazed. My vision blurred, and I felt hands grabbing me, dragging me away from my car. I tried to fight back, but my limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. They pulled me towards their car, shoving me into the back seat. My head was spinning, and I could barely make out their faces through the rain and darkness. The woman got into the driver's seat, and the man sat beside me, holding a gun. "Stay quiet, and you won't get hurt," he growled, his voice low and threatening. I nodded, too scared to speak. The car started moving, and I realized I was in serious trouble. My mind raced, trying to figure out what they wanted. Were they robbers? Kidnappers? I had no idea, but I knew I needed to stay calm and think of a way out. We drove for what felt like hours, the rain pounding against the car. I watched the landscape change from flat desert to rocky hills. There were no other cars, no signs of civilization. Just endless darkness and rain. I tried to keep track of the turns we took, but my head was still throbbing from the blow. Eventually, the car stopped. They pulled me out, and I saw we were in front of an old, abandoned building. They dragged me inside, the musty smell hitting me instantly. The place was falling apart, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. They pushed me into a small room and tied me to a chair. The man stood in front of me, his eyes cold and hard. "We need your car," he said. "You're gonna tell us the code for the GPS tracker, and then we'll let you go." I shook my head, confused. "I don't have a GPS tracker," I said. "I swear." He scowled and hit me across the face. "Don't lie to me. We know you have one." I tasted blood in my mouth and realized they had made a mistake. My car didn't have a tracker, but they wouldn't believe me. I had to find a way to convince them or escape before they decided to kill me. "I'm telling the truth," I insisted. "I'm just passing through. My friend lives in Santa Fe. Please, you have to believe me." The woman walked over, her expression softer than the man's. "Maybe he's telling the truth," she said. "We should check the car." The man nodded reluctantly and left the room. The woman stayed behind, watching me closely. I took a deep breath and tried to think. My hands were tied, but my legs were free. If I could just distract her for a moment, I might have a chance to escape. "Look, I don't want any trouble," I said, trying to sound calm. "Just let me go, and I won't say anything to the police." She shook her head. "We can't take that risk." I heard footsteps outside, and the man returned, looking frustrated. "The car doesn't have a tracker," he said. "He's telling the truth." I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe they would let me go now. But the man's next words crushed that hope. "We can't leave any witnesses," he said, pulling out his gun. "We'll take his car and ditch him here." Panic set in, and I knew I had to act fast. As the woman turned to talk to the man, I kicked out with my legs, hitting her in the knee. She screamed and fell, and I used the distraction to get to my feet, still tied to the chair. The man aimed the gun at me, but I swung the chair around, hitting him with the back of it. He stumbled, and the gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. I didn't wait to see if he was hit. I ran out the door, the chair still tied to me. I heard them shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran through the building, looking for an exit. I found a broken window and threw myself through it, landing hard on the ground outside. The rain was still pouring, making it hard to see, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I struggled to my feet and ran towards the road, the chair slowing me down. I could hear them behind me, getting closer. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I kept going. I saw headlights in the distance and waved frantically, hoping it was a passing car. The vehicle slowed down and stopped. I ran to it, banging on the window. "Help me, please." I shouted. "They're trying to kill me." The driver, an older man, looked shocked but opened the door. "Get in," he said. I climbed in, and he sped off just as my pursuers reached the road. I watched them disappear in the rearview mirror, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The driver took me to the nearest police station, where I told them everything. They found my car in the abandoned building, but the couple was gone. The police assured me they would keep looking, but I knew it would be a long time before I felt safe again. Last summer, I went to a music festival in California with a group of friends. It was supposed to be an amazing weekend, 3 days of music, camping, and fun. The first day was perfect. We set up our tents, danced to our favorite bands, and made a lot of memories. The crowd was huge, and it was easy to get lost in it, but we all stuck together. On the second day, things took a turn. In the afternoon, we were all at the main stage. The sun was blazing, and the music was loud. I remember we were dancing when I suddenly lost sight of my friends. It was packed, and I got pushed by the crowd. One moment they were there, the next they were gone. I tried to find them, but it was hopeless. I walked around for what felt like hours. I kept checking my phone, but there was no signal. I was getting more anxious by the minute. The sun started to set, and the crowd was getting rowdier. I felt alone and vulnerable. That's when a man approached me. He looked to be in his early 30s, with a friendly smile and a calm voice. He asked if I was okay. I told him I lost my friends and couldn't find them. He offered to help me look for them. At that moment, I was grateful. He seemed kind, and I didn't know what else to do. We walked together, weaving through the crowd. He kept talking, trying to keep me calm. He asked about my friends, what they looked like, and where I had last seen them. I answered all his questions, thinking he was just being helpful. But then he suggested we go to a quieter area where it would be easier to hear my phone if it rang. Something felt off, but I was too scared and desperate to find my friends to think straight. We left the main area and walked toward the edge of the festival grounds. The music was distant now, and the crowd was thinning out. We reached a secluded spot near some trees. He said we should wait there for a bit, that maybe my friends would try to call or text. I pulled out my phone again, hoping for a signal. That's when I noticed his demeanor change. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked at me with a strange intensity. He moved closer, too close. Alarm bells went off in my head, and I knew I needed to get away from him. I made an excuse about needing to use the restroom and started to walk away. He grabbed my arm, not hard, but enough to scare me. He said it wasn't safe for me to go alone and that he would come with me. My heart was racing. I pulled my arm free and told him I'd be quick. I walked away fast, trying not to run and draw attention. Once I was out of sight, I started running. I didn't know where I was going, just away from him. I found myself near the camping area, and I ducked behind a row of tents. I crouched down, trying to catch my breath and calm my nerves. I stayed hidden for a while, listening for any sign that he had followed me. It was dark now, and the festival lights were a faint glow in the distance. My phone finally picked up a signal, and I quickly texted my friends, telling them where I was and what had happened. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, I saw familiar faces. My friends found me and hugged me tightly. I broke down, telling them everything. They were shocked and angry that someone had taken advantage of the situation. We went to the festival security and reported the man. They took it seriously and said they would look for him. The rest of the festival was a blur. I couldn't relax or enjoy the music anymore. We stuck together like glue, never letting anyone out of sight. When it was over, I was relieved to go home. The experience left me shaken. I thought about how easily things could have gone worse. I haven't been to a festival since. The thought of getting lost in a crowd again terrifies me. I was traveling through India, exploring the remote areas that tourists usually avoid. I had always been fascinated by the less traveled paths, the hidden gems. One day, I decided to visit a remote temple that I had read about in a travel blog. It was deep in the forest, far from any village or town. The journey itself was an adventure, navigating through narrow, winding roads surrounded by dense trees. When I finally arrived, the temple stood silent and majestic. It was ancient, with intricate carvings and a serene atmosphere. I felt a sense of peace as I walked around, taking in the beauty and the history. I was the only visitor there, which made the experience even more special. I spent hours exploring every corner, lost in my thoughts and the tranquility of the place. As the sun began to set, I realized I needed to head back to my guest house. I started walking towards the parking area where I had left my rental car. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes. I turned around, but saw nothing. I shrugged it off and continued walking, but the uneasy feeling in my gut remained. Out of nowhere, a group of men emerged from the trees. They were dressed in simple clothes, but their faces were covered with scarves, only their eyes visible. They surrounded me, and I could see the anger and determination in their eyes. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. One of them stepped forward, speaking rapidly in a language I couldn't understand. Before I could react, they grabbed me and forced me to the ground. My mind was in a frenzy, trying to think of a way out, but there was no escape. They tied my hands and blindfolded me, then dragged me through the forest. I tried to scream, but one of them gagged me. I felt helpless and terrified, not knowing where they were taking me or what they wanted. After what felt like hours, we stopped. They removed the blindfold and gag, and I found myself in a small, dark room with a dirt floor. It looked like an old shed, but I couldn't be sure. They tied me to a chair and left, locking the door behind them. I was alone, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Hours passed, maybe even days. I had no sense of time. They brought me food and water, but never spoke to me. I tried to talk to them, to understand why they had taken me, but they ignored me. The silence and isolation were maddening. I felt like I was losing my mind. One day, one of the men entered the room. He spoke English, which was a small relief. He told me that they were part of a group fighting against the government. They planned to use me as a bargaining chip to get their demands met. My fear turned to dread as I realized I was just a pawn in their dangerous game. They recorded a video, forcing me to read a statement they had written. I could barely hold the paper, my hands were shaking so much. They sent the video to the authorities, demanding the release of their imprisoned comrades. I felt like my life was hanging by a thread, completely at their mercy. Days turned into weeks. The waiting was the worst part. I could hear them outside, discussing plans and arguing. I tried to stay hopeful, but it was hard. Every time the door opened, I feared it was my end. My thoughts were a constant swirl of fear and desperation. One night, I heard a commotion outside. Shouts and gunfire echoed through the forest. My heart pounded as I realized something was happening. The door burst open, and a group of soldiers stormed in. They were Indian Army, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They untied me and helped me outside. The extremists had been captured or killed. I was safe, but the ordeal had left me shaken to my core. The soldiers took me to a nearby village where I received medical attention and contacted my family. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but the trauma lingered. I returned home, but the memories of that time haunted me. The fear, the isolation, the helplessness, it was all too real. I tried to move on, but every now and then, I would have nightmares, reliving the terror of being captured and held against my will. It was an experience that changed me forever. I had my old camper van, which had served me well on many trips before. I loved the solitude and beauty of the desert, away from the noise of the city. One evening, I found a quiet spot off a dirt road to park for the night. It was miles away from any town, perfect for some peace and quiet. The sunset was breathtaking. I made a simple dinner, sat outside the van, and enjoyed the silence. After a while, I got inside, locked the doors, and settled in for the night. The air was cool, and the sky was clear, full of stars. I felt safe and content. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a soft hissing noise, followed by a thud. I listened carefully but couldn't hear anything else. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal or the wind. But then I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. I peered out the small window but couldn't see much in the darkness. My heart was pounding. I decided to stay quiet and hope whoever it was would leave. The footsteps moved around the van, and I heard a scraping sound near the tires. Then, silence. I waited for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Slowly, I got up and looked out the window again. This time, I saw a figure standing a few yards away, just watching the van. The moonlight cast a shadow, but I couldn't make out any details. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I had to stay calm and think clearly. I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help, but there was no signal. I felt trapped and helpless. The figure didn't move. I wondered if it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I decided to turn on the headlights to get a better look. My hand shook as I reached for the switch. When the lights came on, the figure was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. I heard the sound of something metallic hitting the ground near the back of the van. I turned off the lights and listened again. There were more footsteps, moving away this time. I needed to see what was happening. I took a flashlight and cautiously opened the side door. The air was still, and the desert was eerily quiet. I shone the light around the van and saw the damage. All 4 tires were slashed. I was stranded. Fear gripped me, but I knew I had to stay alert. I looked around but didn't see anyone. Then, in the distance, I noticed a faint light moving away. It was the figure, heading toward the hills. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't drive, and there was no cell signal. My only option was to stay put and hope for daylight. I got back inside the van, locked the doors, and tried to stay calm. Sleep was impossible. Every little noise made me jump. I kept thinking about the figure and what they might do next. As the hours dragged on, I heard a vehicle approaching. My heart raced, unsure if it was help or more trouble. A truck pulled up beside the van, and a man got out. He looked rough, with a grizzled beard and worn clothes. He shone a flashlight into my van, and I felt exposed. "Hey! You all right in there?" he called out. I hesitated but finally opened the door slightly. "My tires got slashed," I said, my voice trembling. "Someone was out here watching me." The man nodded. "Yeah, we've had some trouble with vandals around here. Let's see what we can do." He seemed sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He walked around the van, checking the tires. "You're gonna need new ones," he said. "I've got a spare back at my place, but it's a few miles away. You want to come with me, or wait here?" The thought of staying alone in the van was terrifying. "I'll come with you," I said, grabbing my backpack and flashlight. We drove in silence, the man keeping an eye on the road. I watched the desert landscape, feeling vulnerable. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a small, rundown cabin. He parked the truck in motion for me to follow. Inside, the cabin was cluttered but seemed safe. "Wait here," he said, heading to the back. I looked around, noticing old tools and camping gear. The place felt lived in, but not welcoming. He returned with a tire and some tools. "Let's get you fixed up," he said, and we headed back to the van. The drive felt quicker this time, and I was relieved to see my van still there, untouched. We worked in silence, changing the tires. The man was efficient, and soon enough, the van was ready to go. "You should head to the nearest town and report this," he said. "It's about 20 miles west." I thanked him, still wary but grateful. He nodded and drove off, leaving me alone again. I got in the van and started driving, the fear slowly fading as the sun began to rise. By the time I reached the town, I felt a sense of relief. I found a gas station and called the local authorities, reporting what had happened. They took my statement but didn't seem optimistic about catching the person responsible. I decided to cut my trip short and head back home. The experience had shaken me deeply. The desert, once a place of beauty and solitude, now felt hostile and dangerous. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about the figure and what might have happened if the man hadn't shown up. It took weeks for me to feel safe again. I learned to be more cautious and aware of my surroundings, and I vowed never to camp alone in such remote areas again. The desert's beauty was overshadowed by the terror I experienced, a nightmare that would stay with me forever. I moved to a small town in Kansas to get away from the chaos of city life. It was peaceful at first, everyone knew everyone, and the sense of community was comforting. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, was a quiet man in his late 60s. He kept to himself mostly but was always kind when we crossed paths. One morning, I noticed I hadn't seen Mr. Thompson in a while. His mailbox was overflowing, and his lawn was starting to look unkempt. I knocked on his door, but there was no answer. I asked around, but no one had seen him for days. Something didn't sit right with me, so I decided to look into it. I started by searching for any family or friends he might have had. A few neighbors mentioned he had a sister who lived out of state, but no one had her contact information. I found myself at the local library, digging through old newspapers and public records. That's when I found an old article about Mr. Thompson's wife who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years ago. It was all starting to feel very strange. A few days into my search, I found an anonymous note slipped under my door. "Stop asking questions," it read. I felt a chill run down my spine but brushed it off as a prank. I continued my search, more determined than ever. Then, another note appeared. This time it was more direct. "Mind your own business, or you'll end up like him." I reported the notes to the local police, but they dismissed it as someone playing a joke. I was getting scared, but I couldn't stop now. I needed to know what happened to Mr. Thompson. Late one night, I was going through some old records at the library when I felt someone watching me. I looked up and saw a man I didn't recognize, just staring. He quickly left when I noticed him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to head home, but on my way out, I saw the same man standing across the street under a lamppost. He was still watching me. I hurried home, locking all my doors and windows. The next morning, my car had a flat tire. It felt too coincidental to be an accident. I was terrified, but I couldn't let it show. I borrowed a friend's car and kept investigating. One evening, as I was coming home, I saw someone inside my house through the window. My heart raced as I quietly approached. The door was ajar, and I could hear someone moving around. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had gone. They left another note, last warning. That night, I barely slept. I kept a light on and a chair wedged under the door handle. I realized I was dealing with someone who had a lot to lose if I found out the truth. The next day, I decided to confront the town's mayor, Mr. Henson. He was a well-connected man, and I had started to suspect he knew more than he let on. I went to his office and demanded answers. He seemed calm, almost amused. "You should have left well enough alone," he said, leaning back in his chair. He didn't confirm or deny anything, but made it clear I was in over my head. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a knock on the door. It was Mr. Henson. "We need to talk," he said. I refused to let him in, but he forced his way inside. "You don't understand what you're getting into," he said, his tone darkening. "This town has secrets, and Mr. Thompson found out the hard way." Before I could respond, he lunged at me. We struggled, and I managed to break free, running out the back door. I ran to a neighbor's house and called the police. They arrived quickly and arrested Mr. Henson. They found evidence in his office that linked him to several disappearances, including Mr. Thompson's. The police eventually found Mr. Thompson alive, held captive in an old shed on Mr. Henson's property. He had been trying to expose Mr. Henson's corrupt dealings and paid the price for it. The town was shocked, but grateful the truth had finally come out. Mr. Henson was tried and convicted, and Mr. Thompson moved in with his sister out of state. I stayed in the town, but I was forever changed. The peace I once felt was gone, replaced by a constant sense of unease. But I knew I had done the right thing, and that was enough to keep me going. It was supposed to be a peaceful camping trip, just me and my trusty camper van in the Texas Hill Country. But as the sun set and darkness fell over the landscape, things took a sinister turn. I had parked in a secluded spot, surrounded by rolling hills and towering trees. The night air was still and quiet, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't shake. As I settled in for the night, I heard the sound of voices in the distance. At first, I thought it might be other campers passing by, but as the voices grew louder, I realized something was wrong. Peering out the window of my van, I saw a group of men approaching. They were loud and boisterous, their laughter echoing through the night air. But there was something about their demeanor that set off alarm bells in my mind. I tried to ignore them, to pretend like I hadn't noticed their presence, but they had other ideas. They began to circle my van, shouting insults and banging on the doors. I felt a surge of fear rising in my chest as I realized I was trapped. These men weren't just passing through, they were intent on causing trouble. I tried to reason with them, to explain that I just wanted to be left alone, but they wouldn't listen. They grew increasingly aggressive, their voices turning into shouts and their gestures becoming more threatening. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what these men were capable of, and the thought of confronting them filled me with dread. But just as things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. I held my breath, hoping against hope that it was someone coming to help me. And then, like a guardian angel, a park ranger emerged from the darkness. He was tall and imposing, his presence commanding respect. He quickly assessed the situation and ordered the men to leave. At first, they resisted, but when they saw the ranger's badge glinting in the moonlight, they knew they didn't stand a chance. Reluctantly, they backed away, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had come. I breathed a sigh of relief, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. The park ranger stayed with me until dawn, making sure I was safe and reassuring me that he would keep an eye on the area. I thanked him profusely, grateful for his intervention. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I packed up my things and drove away from that cursed spot as fast as I could. The memory of that terrifying night would stay with me forever, but I knew that I had survived thanks to the timely intervention of the park ranger. Now, as I sit in the safety of my home, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he hadn't come when he did. I live in this small town in Tennessee, where everybody knows everybody else's business. It's the kind of place where secrets don't stay buried for long. My father passed away a few months ago, and it was only after his death that I started uncovering the truth about his past. I always knew my dad was a bit shady, but I never realized the extent of his involvement in organized crime until now. It started with a few whispers around town, rumors about my dad's connections to some unsavory characters. At first, I didn't want to believe it. My dad was my hero, my role model. He worked hard to provide for our family, and I couldn't imagine him being mixed up in anything illegal. But the more I dug, the more evidence I found to the contrary. I found old newspaper clippings, police reports, even photos of my dad with known criminals. It was like peeling back layers of a rotten onion, each layer revealing something darker and more sinister than the last. I confronted my mom about it, but she just brushed it off, saying it was all in the past and didn't matter anymore. But it did matter. It mattered a lot. I started hearing things, whispers in the dark, threats against me and my family. I knew I had to do something, had to distance myself from my father's legacy before it consumed me too. I tried to leave town, to start fresh somewhere else, but they wouldn't let me. They followed me, watching my every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, I came home to find my house ransacked, my belongings strewn about like confetti. I knew then that I was in over my head, that I couldn't outrun my father's past. I tried to reach out to the authorities, but they turned a blind eye, saying there was nothing they could do without concrete evidence. But I knew better. I knew they were in on it too, that they were just as corrupt as the criminals they were supposed to be fighting against. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, with no way out. Every time I turned around, there they were, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to slip up so they could pounce. I started sleeping with one eye open, jumping at every little sound. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own friends. It was like I was living in a constant state of fear and paranoia. Then, one night, they finally made their move. I was out for a walk, trying to clear my head, when they jumped me from behind. They beat me within an inch of my life, leaving me lying in a pool of my own blood. But I refused to give up. I fought back with everything I had, clawing and scratching and biting until they finally backed off. It was a close call, but I managed to escape with my life. After that night, I knew I couldn't stay in that town any longer. I packed up what little I had left and hit the road, never looking back. I checked into the motel late, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was a small, rundown place in rural Kentucky, the kind you pass by without a second thought. I was traveling through for work, needing a place to sleep before heading out early the next morning. The manager, a burly man with a thick southern accent, handed me the key to room 6. He didn't say much, just nodded and went back to watching his TV. The room was as expected, old, musty, with a bed that creaked and a bathroom that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. I tossed my bag on the bed and decided to take a quick shower before getting some sleep. The water was lukewarm at best, and the pressure was almost non-existent. I didn't care. I just wanted to wash off the day's grime and relax. After my shower, I settled into bed with a book. It was quiet, almost too quiet, save for the occasional car passing by on the highway. I was starting to drift off when I heard a knock at the door. I looked at the clock, 11:30 p.m. Odd, I thought. Maybe it was the manager needing something. I got up, wrapped a towel around myself, and peeked through the peephole. There were 3 men standing outside, looking impatient. They didn't look like motel staff. I hesitated, unsure whether to open the door. Then one of them spoke up, his voice gruff. "We know you're in there. Open up, we need to talk." I cracked the door open just enough to see them clearly. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're the one who checked in today, right?" the same man asked. "Yes, why?" "Come on out, we need to have a chat," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. "I don't think that's necessary. I'm just here for the night and leaving early tomorrow." The man exchanged a look with his companions. "Step outside." "Now," he ordered. I closed the door slightly, trying to think. They didn't look like they were going to leave. I didn't have many options. Grabbing my phone, I texted my colleague, "In trouble. Room 6, rural motel. Call 911. Then I slowly opened the door again, stepping outside. The men surrounded me, their expressions hard. "We need to know who you're working for," the leader demanded. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, my voice shaking. "I'm just a traveler passing through. Don't lie to us. We know you're involved." "Who sent you?" he barked. Panic surged through me. They thought I was someone else, someone involved in whatever illegal activity they were part of. "I swear, you've got the wrong person. I'm not involved in anything. I don't know who you think I am, but I'm not them." The leader grabbed my arm, squeezing hard. "We don't believe you. You're coming with us." I struggled, trying to pull away. "Let go of me." I yelled, but it was no use. They were too strong. They dragged me towards a van parked nearby. My heart pounded as I fought to break free, but they shoved me inside and slammed the door shut. The drive felt like an eternity. My mind raced with thoughts of what they might do to me. I had to find a way out. The van eventually stopped, and they pulled me out, leading me into an old, abandoned barn. Inside, there were more men, all armed. "Who the hell is this?" one of them asked. "She's the one from the motel. Claims she's not involved," the leader said, pushing me forward. The new man studied me, his eyes cold and calculating. "Maybe she's telling the truth. We can't be sure." "Then what do we do with her?" the leader asked. "Keep her here until we figure it out," he replied. They tied me to a chair, the ropes cutting into my wrists. I sat there, my mind racing, trying to think of a way to escape. Hours passed, and the men argued amongst themselves. I caught snippets of their conversation. They were part of a local criminal ring, and they thought I was a spy or informant. As dawn approached, the men started to get agitated. They hadn't gotten any information out of me because I had nothing to give. The leader finally decided to call someone higher up. While they were distracted, I noticed a sharp piece of metal on the ground near my chair. I carefully worked the ropes against it, trying to cut through. It took time, but eventually, I managed to free my hands. I waited for the right moment when they were all focused on the phone call, then slipped out of the chair and bolted for the door. They shouted, realizing I was escaping, but I didn't look back. I ran into the woods, branches scratching my face and arms as I pushed through. I kept running, fueled by fear and adrenaline. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get as far away as possible. Eventually, I stumbled upon a road and flagged down a passing car. The driver, a kind older woman, took one look at me and knew something was wrong. She drove me to the nearest police station. At the station, I told them everything. They took my statement and promised to investigate. My colleague had indeed called the police, and they were already looking for me. The criminals were arrested later that day, and I was finally safe. The experience left me shaken. I couldn't believe how close I had come to being caught in something terrible, all because of a case of mistaken identity. I'm the keeper of a lighthouse, and let me tell you about the scariest night of my life. It was during a storm, one of those really bad ones that rattles the windows and shakes the whole building. I was up in the tower, doing my usual rounds and keeping an eye on the sea. That's when I saw it, a shipwrecked sailor clinging to a piece of driftwood, desperately trying to stay afloat in the churning waters. My heart went out to him, knowing that he was in serious trouble out there. So I did what any decent person would do. I let him in. I guided him up to the lighthouse, trying to be a good Samaritan and offer him shelter from the storm. But as soon as he stepped inside, I knew that something was wrong. There was something about him, something in his eyes that set off alarm bells in my head. He was hostile from the start, demanding food and shelter like he owned the place. I tried to reason with him, to tell him that I was just trying to help. But he wasn't having any of it, getting more aggressive by the minute. I knew I had to do something, to protect myself and the lighthouse from this dangerous man. So I tried to reason with him, to calm him down and get him to see reason. But he wasn't interested in listening, too caught up in his own anger and frustration. That's when he made his move, lunging at me with a knife in his hand. I barely had time to react, dodging out of the way and trying to defend myself as best as I could. It was like something out of a nightmare, like I was trapped in some kind of horror movie. I managed to grab hold of a nearby lamp and swing it at him, knocking him off balance and giving me enough time to make a run for it. I didn't stop running until I was miles away from the lighthouse, until I was sure that he couldn't follow me anymore. I called for help as soon as I could, telling them what had happened and begging them to come and get me. It felt like hours before they finally arrived, like I was trapped in some kind of endless nightmare. But eventually they found me, and they took me back to safety. I never found out what happened to that sailor, whether they caught him or whether he managed to slip away into the night. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget that night for as long as I live. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and it's something that I hope I never have to experience again.